Hello. Dive in. Stories await. It's early evening, and I'm standing in the pet store trying to choose between two ridiculously overpriced dog toys. I don't even know why I'm stressing over it. Ollie, my furry partner in crime, is going to destroy whichever one I buy in under 10 minutes. But still, I'm stuck between a squeaky taco and a plush octopus. And for some reason, this feels like a major life decision. Just as I'm about to commit to the taco, someone steps into the aisle next to me. I glance over and see a guy, mid-30s, dark hoodie, jeans, and sneakers that are scuffed just enough to look lived in. He's holding a bag of dog treats and inspecting the display like he's on a secret mission. His hair is a little messy, and there's this calm, slightly amused expression on his face, like he's seen the chaos of the world and decided not to let it bother him. He catches me looking and gives a small grin. You know, that taco looks like a solid choice. But I gotta say, something about the octopus screams unstoppable fun. I laugh, lifting the octopus to examine it one more time. Yeah, but this thing doesn't stand a chance. My dog is, let's just say enthusiastic about his toys. Ah, he says, nodding with deep understanding. You've got a destroyer. That's putting it lightly, I reply. He thinks every toy is a personal challenge. He chuckles, holding up the bag of treats. Same here. I buy these and they last about 5 minutes. But hey, those 5 minutes are pretty magical. I grin, surprised by how easy it is to talk to him. There's no awkwardness, just a friendly back and forth, like we've known each other for longer than 30 seconds. So, what kind of troublemaker do you have? Charlie, he says like the name alone explains everything. He's a rescue, part shepherd, part mystery, all chaos. I nod knowingly. Ollie's a rescue too. Part mutt, part gremlin. He laughs, the kind of laugh that makes me want to keep the conversation going. Sounds like they'd be best friends, or mortal enemies. Depends on the day, I say with a smirk. Sometimes Ollie loves his friends, and sometimes he just wants to steal their toys and act like a king. He grins. Charlie's exactly the same. It's like having a toddler with fur and a criminal record. I laugh again, and for a moment, the world feels a little lighter, a little less serious. We're just two strangers in a pet store, bonding over our mischievous dogs and the weird joys of pet parenting. I gesture toward the toy aisle. So, any advice? Taco or octopus? He taps his chin thoughtfully, as if this is a decision that requires great wisdom. Well, the taco squeaks, but the octopus has 8 legs to rip off, so honestly, I think it depends on how much chaos you're in the mood for. I say, pretending to weigh my options. I think we're going octopus today. Might as well give Ollie a challenge. Good call, he says, nodding approvingly. The taco was too easy. We both start toward the checkout, and the conversation flows easily along the way. I find out his name is Alex. He works remotely as a web designer, and his weekends are basically spent trying to keep Charlie entertained. I tell him about my own Ollie adventures, including the time he stole a whole pizza off the kitchen counter and tried to bury it in the backyard. Smart dog, Alex says, grinning. Pizza is worth hiding. We reach the register, and I half expect this to be the end of the interaction. But instead of making a quick exit, Alex lingers for just a second longer, like he's enjoying this little encounter as much as I am. You know, he says casually, if you ever want to introduce Ollie to a partner in crime, Charlie could probably use a friend, or an arch nemesis. Either way, he pulls out a pen, because apparently he's one of those rare people who always has a pen, and scribbles something on the back of his receipt. His name, his number, and a little doodle of what looks like a dog. He hands it to me with a playful grin. Just in case Ollie needs a new buddy, he says like it's the simplest thing in the world. No pressure. I take the receipt, smiling. Thanks, Alex. I'll think about it. But fair warning, Ollie's not great at sharing. Neither is Charlie, he says with a laugh. They'll get along just fine. He gives me a little wave, grabs his bag of treats, and heads for the door. I stand there for a moment, holding the octopus in one hand and the receipt in the other, feeling a little lighter than I did when I walked in. And yeah, I texted him, because honestly, anyone who can make a trip to the pet store this fun is someone worth knowing. Plus, let's face it, Ollie could use an arch nemesis. If you've never almost been decapitated by your own ceiling fan, congratulations, you've already lived a smarter life than me. I know how stupid that sounds, but I swear this fan had it in for me from the moment I moved in. I didn't realize it at first, of course. But by the end of this story, you'll understand. Ceiling fans aren't just household appliances. They're silent assassins. So, it started on a Saturday afternoon. I was deep in spring cleaning mode, the kind of cleaning where you're moving furniture, throwing out old junk, and convincing yourself that this time, you're really going to get your life together. I had music blasting, coffee in hand, and everything was going smoothly until I noticed the ceiling fan. The fan was wobbling. Just a little. Barely noticeable, really. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't even on, yet there it was, swaying ever so slightly like it had a secret agenda. I stared at it, thinking, that can't be good. What if the screws are loose? What if it falls in the middle of the night and crushes me? What if? You get the idea. Naturally, I decided that the fan had to be fixed immediately. I grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, dragged a wobbly chair over, and climbed up. Now, let me tell you something important. I am not tall, not even close. So standing on a chair only brought me just within reach of the fan blades. To get to the base where the screws were, I had to stretch like an idiot trying to reach the top shelf at a grocery store. This was mistake number one. As I leaned forward, standing on my tiptoes like a circus act, the chair beneath me gave a little wobble. I ignored it. I was on a mission. I twisted one screw, then another, tightening them with an air of confidence that should have been illegal for someone with zero experience in home repairs. And that's when I made mistake number two. I decided to test the fan. Now, you'd think I'd get off the chair first, but no, that would have been too smart. Instead, I stayed on the chair, one hand still holding the screwdriver, and reached up to pull the fan's cord. The fan came to life with an angry whir, and instantly started spinning at full speed. The first blade caught the screwdriver and nearly ripped it out of my hand. I yelped, stumbling backward as the fan roared overhead, spinning like it was trying to take flight. I swear, I could feel the wind it was kicking up, and for one terrifying second, I thought it was going to lift off the ceiling and come after me like a propeller from a war movie. I panicked. I tried to hop off the chair, but in my haste, I lost my balance. The chair wobbled, then toppled. I hit the floor hard, flat on my back, and the screwdriver went flying. For a moment, everything was still. I lay there, stunned, trying to catch my breath while the fan continued spinning above me like it was celebrating my defeat. Then I noticed the screwdriver. It had landed a few inches from my face, sharp end buried in the carpet like a tiny sword. If it had landed any closer, well, let's just say my obituary would have been a disaster. Local man killed by his own stupidity and a rogue ceiling fan. But the worst part? The fan was still on, and now that I was eye level with it, I could see it wobbling even worse than before. If anything, my brilliant repair job had made it angrier. At this point, I did what any reasonable person would do. I army crawled to the wall, reached up, and yanked the plug out of the socket. The fan sputtered to a stop, leaving me lying on the floor, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding out of my chest. I stayed there for a minute, just breathing, staring at the ceiling, and thinking about how close I'd come to being taken out by household appliances. And let me tell you, that is not how I want to go. I've had my share of close calls, falling off bikes, choking on snacks, almost electrocuting myself with a toaster, but death by ceiling fan? That would have been peak stupidity. After a few minutes, I finally got up, wincing as my back reminded me that falling on hardwood floors is not fun. I looked at the fan, still, silent, and completely unapologetic, and decided right then and there, I'm never touching it again. If it wobbled, fine. If it fell, I'd just dodge it like a ninja and call it a win. Later, when I told my friend about the incident, she couldn't stop laughing. "You're telling me you almost died trying to fix a fan?" she gasped, clutching her sides. "Yes," I said, deadpan. "And it's not funny. That fan was out for blood." "Sure it was," she snorted. "What's next? You gonna battle your dishwasher?" "Don't give the appliances ideas," I muttered. To this day, I avoid ceiling fans like the plague. If it's wobbly, it stays wobbly. If it makes weird noises, I sleep with earplugs. And if someone asks me to help with home repairs, I politely decline because I've learned my lesson. Some battles just aren't worth fighting. And if anyone ever asks why I don't mess with ceiling fans anymore, I just shake my head and say, let's just say, I've been through some things. For the past year, I've been bluffing my way through poker night with my boyfriend and his friends. He thinks I'm a natural, a cool, collected card shark who's always one hand away from cleaning house. The truth? I have no idea what I'm doing. I barely know how to play Go Fish, let alone Texas Hold'em. But somehow, I've kept up the act, and now I'm in so deep I'm basically gambling with my relationship. It all started the first time I met his friends. They host a monthly poker night, and when my boyfriend invited me along, I thought it'd be a fun way to get to know everyone. Do you know how to play? He asked. And instead of being honest, I smiled and said, of course. I love poker. Spoiler, I do not love poker. I don't even know what a straight flush is. I figured I could wing it, watch the others, mimic what they do, and coast through the night without drawing too much attention to myself. Easy, right? Except within the first 10 minutes, one of his friends dealt me a hand and asked, "You in?" I had absolutely no idea what was happening, so I did what any self-respecting adult would do. I panicked, said, "All in," and shoved my entire stack of chips into the center of the table. Everyone gasped. "Whoa," my boyfriend said, eyes wide. "You sure about that?" No, I was not sure. I didn't even know what I was doing. But I couldn't back down now, so I nodded confidently and tried to channel the energy of someone who knew what the hell was going on. And somehow, by some miracle, I won the hand. A full house. Everyone stared at me in disbelief as I scooped up the chips. "Beginner's luck," I said with a shrug, trying not to pass out from the adrenaline. That one win was the worst thing that could have happened. Now, my boyfriend thinks I'm good at poker. Like, really good. He keeps telling people how natural I am and how cool under pressure I stay during big hands. Meanwhile, I'm frantically Googling poker terms under the table, trying to figure out what the hell a river is and why people keep folding when I blink. I've developed a system. I make lots of vague comments like, "It's all about reading the room," or "You just gotta trust the odds." When someone asks if I'm in, I squint at my cards like I'm deep in thought, then casually push a few chips into the center. If I lose, I say, the cards just weren't in my favor tonight. If I win, I act like it's all part of my master plan. But the thing is, I've somehow kept winning. I don't know how. I just go with my gut and bluff like my life depends on it, and it works. My boyfriend is convinced I have some kind of gift, and now his friends are terrified of playing against me. One of them even called me the silent assassin, and I nearly choked on my beer. And now, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor, my boyfriend has entered us into a couples poker tournament. A real tournament. With real money. I am completely and utterly screwed. I've been trying to come up with a way out. Maybe I could fake a sudden allergic reaction to playing cards. Or pretend that I have an emergency the day of the tournament. But my boyfriend is so excited. He keeps telling everyone how we're going to wipe the floor with him. And I can't bring myself to let him down. So now, I'm watching poker tutorials on YouTube like it's my full-time job. I even ordered a deck of cards to practice shuffling, which, by the way, is much harder than it looks. At this point, I've learned just enough to know that I have no business being in a poker tournament. But hey, love makes you do dumb things. Like pretending you know how to play a game where people can literally read your soul. I know I need to come clean. I can't keep bluffing my way through life, especially not when real money is on the line. But how do you tell your boyfriend, "Hey babe, remember how you think I'm a poker genius?" Yeah, I've actually been winging it this whole time. I barely know what a flush is, and honestly, I thought the river was just, a river. Maybe he'll laugh. Maybe he'll think it's cute. Or maybe he'll realize that our relationship has been built on a foundation of lies and poorly timed bets. Honestly, at this point, anything is possible. But here's the thing. As much as I hate poker, I love him. And if sitting at a poker table for hours, pretending to know what I'm doing, makes him happy, I'll do it. I'll keep bluffing, keep pretending, keep smiling through every hand, even if my heart is pounding the entire time. Who knows? Maybe I'll get lucky again. Or maybe I'll crash and burn in spectacular fashion. Either way, I'll have a great story to tell. And if we lose, well, there's always blackjack. When the text came through, it was already getting late. Client requested midnight meet. Hotel Rooftop. No expectations, just conversation. I stared at my phone for a long moment. debating whether I wanted to say yes. Midnight meetups always felt strange, like stepping into a dream that doesn't quite belong to the waking world. But the money was good, and I figured if all I had to do was talk under the stars, I could handle that. The hotel wasn't far, one of those sleek, modern places with sharp lines and mood lighting. The kind of place where people take photos of their food because it costs too much not to remember. I took the elevator to the rooftop, expecting something glamorous. Twinkling lights, trendy cocktails, the distant hum of expensive conversations. But when the elevator doors opened, the rooftop was empty. Just a few scattered chairs, a glowing pool, and the soft hum of the city below. And then I saw him. He was standing by the edge, leaning on the glass railing, staring out at the skyline as if it held all the answers he'd been searching for. He looked young, late 30s maybe, but there was something about the way he stood, the weight in his shoulders, that made him seem older. Or maybe just tired. When he heard me step closer, he glanced over his shoulder and gave me a small, cautious smile. "You must be Jade," he said, his voice low and calm. "That's me," I replied, mirroring his smile. "And you are?" "Ben," he said simply. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I said, stepping up beside him at the railing. "Nice view." "Yeah." He exhaled long and slow. "It's quieter up here. That's what I like about it." I leaned on the railing, letting the breeze brush past us. And for a moment, we just stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city shimmer below. It was one of those rare moments when words felt unnecessary. Just two people sharing space. After a few minutes, Ben tilted his head slightly, as if weighing whether or not to say something. "Do you ever feel like the world just keeps moving even when you want it to stop?" I glanced at him, surprised by the question. "Yeah," I said softly. "All the time." Ben smiled, just a flicker of one, but real enough. "Good. I thought maybe I was the only one." He shifted slightly, resting his elbows on the railing. "It's been a strange year," he admitted. "Feels like everything I thought I had figured out just fell apart. Got divorced, sold the house, even had to give away the dog." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "I don't even like dogs that much, but I miss that dumb little guy." I nodded, not saying anything right away. There was something fragile about the way he said it, like he was still trying to make sense of the pieces he was holding on to. "Sounds like a lot," I said gently. "Yeah." He stared out at the city lights, lost in thought. "And the weird thing is I thought I'd feel free, you know? Like, okay, everything's gone to shit, but at least I can start over. But instead," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It's like the world kept moving, and I got stuck." I nodded slowly, understanding more than I wanted to admit. I think sometimes starting over is harder than staying stuck. He glanced at me, something like relief flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, exactly." We stood there for a while, not saying much, just letting the night breeze carry away the weight of the silence. After a moment, Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out a flask. He held it up, giving me a lopsided grin. "Whiskey. Want some?" "Sure," I said, grateful for anything to take the edge off the night. He handed me the flask, and I took a sip, the burn of the whiskey spreading through my chest. It tasted like cheap decisions and long nights, but it felt right somehow. I handed it back, and Ben took a swig, exhaling slowly, as if the whiskey was loosening something inside him. "You ever look at the stars and wonder if they know how small all of this is?" he asked suddenly, gesturing at the city below. I smiled. "All the time." Ben leaned back, looking up at the sky. "It's weird, right? How we're all just here, trying to make sense of things that probably don't make sense at all." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." The conversation drifted after that. Light and heavy, funny and sad, the way real conversations tend to be when there's no need to impress anyone. He told me about his ex-wife, about how they fought over stupid things like toothpaste and laundry, but also about the good days, the little moments when they'd laugh over nothing, and it felt like everything was exactly as it should be. "Funny how the good memories hurt more," he said, his voice low and raw. "Yeah," I agreed. "They sneak up on you when you least expect it." He gave me a sad smile. "Exactly." At some point, we sat down on the edge of the pool, our legs dangling over the side. The water glowed softly, reflecting the city lights in little ripples. It felt surreal, like we were the last two people awake in a world that had forgotten us. But it also felt peaceful, like for once, we didn't have to pretend to be okay. Ben tilted his head back, looking at the sky again. "You ever wonder what it's all for?" he asked softly. "All the time," I said. And I shrugged. "I think maybe it's just for moments like this. The quiet ones where everything feels still." He smiled, a real one this time. "I like that." We sat there in silence for a while longer, the weight of the world slipping away, if only for a little while. The whiskey, the stars, the quiet hum of the city, it all blurred together into something that felt a little like peace. Eventually, Ben stood up and offered me a hand. "I guess we should call it a night," he said, though he didn't sound like he wanted it to end. Yeah, I agreed, letting him help me to my feet. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket and handed it to me without ceremony. "Thanks, Jade," he said quietly, "for being here. Anytime," I said, tucking the envelope into my purse. Ben hesitated, as if there was more he wanted to say, but in the end, he just gave me a small, tired smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "You too, Ben," I said softly. As I made my way back to the elevator, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. Ben was still standing by the railing, looking out at the city like he was trying to memorize it. And for a moment, I felt something shift, like we'd both shared a little piece of ourselves that neither of us could explain, but somehow understood. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft ding, and I rode down in silence, the night still lingering in the air around me. When I stepped out onto the street, the city felt different, quieter, softer. And as I walked home through the sleeping streets, I realized something that surprised me. Sometimes, all we really need is a little company. Not to fix anything, not to solve the world's problems, just to remind us that we're not alone in the quiet moments that stretch between the chaos. And for tonight, that was enough. Last summer, I drove out to visit a friend who had just moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those places you only hear about when you get lost on the highway. A tiny dot on the map with one gas station, a diner, and a bunch of winding back roads that all looked the same. I was already uneasy about the drive, but my friend had insisted it would be worth it. "You'll love it out here," she said. "Peaceful and quiet. You need this." She wasn't wrong. I didn't need the break. But driving through miles of empty fields and dense forest in the pitch dark wasn't exactly my idea of peaceful, especially not alone. By the time I left her place to drive home, it was close to midnight. The air outside was heavy with humidity, and the only sounds were the occasional chirp of crickets and the hum of my car's engine. I typed my address into my GPS and let it guide me back toward the highway. About 20 minutes into the drive, the GPS suggested a shortcut. I hesitated for a second, but figured, why not? If it saved me time, I wasn't going to complain. The new route took me off the main road and onto a narrow two-lane street that wound through a thick patch of forest. At first, everything seemed fine. The trees crowded the road, their branches hanging low, but my headlights cut through the darkness, and the hum of the engine was oddly soothing. The GPS said I'd reconnect with the highway in about 10 miles, so I settled in and kept driving. Then, out of nowhere, the road changed. The smooth asphalt gave way to cracked concrete, and the trees on either side grew denser, their branches twisted and gnarled like old hands reaching toward the road. The streetlights, which had been few and far between to begin with, completely disappeared. I glanced at the GPS, but the screen showed nothing. Just a blue spinning in the middle of a black void. No map, no directions. Just me, the car, and that lonely stretch of road. That's when I noticed the first sign. It stood crooked at the side of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. The words were faded and scratched, but I could just make them out. "Don't stop." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and I pressed the gas pedal a little harder, my heart beginning to race. A mile or two passed, and I started to convince myself it was just some old, forgotten road marker. Nothing to worry about. But then I saw another sign. "Keep going." This one was newer, the letters freshly painted, as if someone had put it there recently. My heart pounded in my chest. I told myself it was just a prank, some local kids messing around. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. The road seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning through the dense forest. And then, as I rounded a sharp curve, I saw it. A figure. It stood in the middle of the road, just barely illuminated by my headlights. It was tall, too tall, with long, thin limbs that seemed to sway slightly in the night breeze. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could tell it was watching me. My foot instinctively hit the brake, but then I remembered the signs. Don't stop. The thing in the road didn't move. It just stood there waiting. My hands shook as I tightened my grip on the wheel. I knew I had to keep going, had to drive straight through. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't risk it. There was no telling how far I'd have to backtrack, and something told me that if I turned around, I'd never find my way out of those woods. I pressed the gas pedal. The car surged forward, headlights cutting through the dark. The figure in the road didn't flinch. It just stood there, perfectly still, as my car barreled toward it. For a split second, I thought I saw it smile, a slow, deliberate curl of the lips, like it knew something I didn't. And then I drove right through it. There was no impact, no thud, nothing. The figure dissolved into the air like smoke, vanishing the moment my car passed through the space where it had stood. I kept driving, heart pounding, too scared to look in the rearview mirror. The road seemed to narrow even more, the trees pressing in from both sides. My headlights flickered once, twice, and for a moment, I thought they might go out. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the road opened up. The dense forest gave way to empty fields, and I could see the bright lights of the highway in the distance. The GPS pinged back to life, recalculating my route as if nothing had happened. I didn't slow down until I merged onto the highway, my hands still shaking on the wheel. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing standing in the road behind me. But there was nothing, just the dark, empty road stretching out behind me. I didn't sleep that night, and I've never taken a shortcut since. But sometimes, late at night, I'll be driving along a back road or a lonely highway, and I'll catch a glimpse of something, just a shadow, standing at the edge of the road, watching. And I know, deep down, that if I ever stop, it'll be waiting for me. Some mistakes stick with you forever. This one will haunt me until the day I die. I didn't just cross a line, I burned the entire map. It all started with a wedding because, of course, it did. My cousin Mark was getting married to his long-term girlfriend, Becca, and the whole family was invited. I wasn't super close with Mark, but I figured free food, open bar, and a reason to dress up? Why not? What I didn't plan for was Becca's maid of honor, Claire. Claire wasn't just gorgeous, she was dangerous. Dark red hair, sharp green eyes, and a smile that said, "Yeah, I know I'm trouble, and I like it that way." The first time I saw her was at the rehearsal dinner, and from the second we locked eyes, I knew I was in trouble. I tried to tell myself she was off limits. It was a wedding after all. People talk, and bad decisions have long shadows. But Claire didn't seem like someone who cared much about rules. And apparently neither did I. The day of the wedding was perfect, or at least it started that way. The ceremony went smoothly, Mark and Becca looked like the perfect couple, and everyone was in a good mood. The reception was held in a beautiful old barn decked out with fairy lights and enough alcohol to drown a fleet of sailors. I figured I'd have a couple of drinks, hit the dance floor, and maybe call it an early night. But Claire had other plans. She found me near the bar during the cocktail hour, sipping a whiskey and trying to look less awkward than I felt. "You're Mark's cousin, right?" she asked, sliding up beside me with a mischievous grin. "That's me," I said, trying to play it cool. "And you must be the maid of honor." She gave me that smile again, the one that made me feel like I was already in too deep. "Guilty. You having fun?" "Yeah, it's a great wedding," I said, knowing full well I was only paying half attention to what she was saying because my brain was busy screaming, "Do not flirt with this woman. This will end badly." But then she leaned in, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and whispered, "Weddings are boring, don't you think?" I knew where this was headed, and instead of walking away, I smiled like a fool and said, "Depends on who you spend them with." The night got hazy fast. We danced, drank too much, and talked about everything and nothing. Claire had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, and I was helpless against it. It was one of those nights where time feels slippery. One second you're laughing at the bar, and the next you're on the dance floor, hands on each other like no one's watching. Spoiler alert, everyone was watching. Around midnight, Claire grabbed my hand and whispered, "Let's get out of here." There were 1,000 reasons to say no, but the way she looked at me, I wasn't saying no to anything that night. We ended up back at the hotel where most of the guests were staying. We barely made it through the door before we were all over each other, kissing, laughing, stumbling toward the bed like a pair of idiots with zero foresight. It was reckless and stupid and one of the best nights I've ever had. The problem? I forgot to think about the morning after. The next morning was a nightmare. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. My head was pounding, my mouth felt like sandpaper, and for a blissful 5 seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I rolled over and saw Claire, tangled in the sheets beside me, looking far too peaceful for someone who had just helped me ruin my life. My phone buzzed again. I grabbed it and saw a string of messages from my mom. "Where are you? Everyone's at brunch. Get here now. There's some drama. Call me ASAP." My stomach dropped. I sat up in bed, rubbing my face, trying to piece together what the hell had happened. Claire stirred beside me, blinking awake with a lazy smile. "Morning," she murmured, like this was the most normal thing in the world. We need to get out of here," I said, panic creeping into my voice. "I think something's wrong." Claire raised an eyebrow, still half asleep. "Relax. It's just brunch." I had a bad feeling it wasn't just brunch. We got dressed and headed downstairs, hoping to sneak into brunch unnoticed. That hope died the second we walked into the restaurant. The entire room went quiet. Every head turned toward us, Mark, Becca, their parents, my parents, and every other wedding guest who mattered. And sitting right in the middle of the room, looking absolutely furious, was Becca's mom. I locked eyes with her, and in that moment, everything became clear. Claire, the woman I had just spent the night with, was Becca's cousin. Becca's mom stared daggers at me, and I could practically hear the scandal unfolding in her mind. Claire, on the other hand, just smirked like she'd been caught sneaking out past curfew. "Good morning, everyone," she said, completely unfazed. I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Mark looked like he was about to implode. Becca's face was a mask of shock and betrayal, and I could tell that whatever goodwill I'd built with their family over the years had just gone up in flames. "Are you serious right now?" Mark hissed, shooting me a look that could kill. I didn't know. I stammered, knowing how pathetic I sounded. "I swear, I didn't know she was..." "You slept with my wife's cousin the night of my wedding," he cut me off, his voice rising. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Claire, bless her reckless heart, just shrugged and said, "It's not a big deal, Mark. We're all adults here." That didn't help. The rest of brunch was a blur of angry whispers, judgmental stares, and the overwhelming urge to disappear into the nearest ocean. Mark refused to speak to me for the rest of the trip, and Becca's mom made it her personal mission to let everyone know exactly what had happened. I spent the rest of the weekend avoiding eye contact with anyone and praying that somehow this would all blow over. Spoiler alert, it didn't. To this day, Mark and I aren't on speaking terms. The story of that night has become family legend, and every time there's a wedding or a reunion, someone brings it up just to watch me squirm. As for Claire, I never saw her again after that weekend, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Some mistakes you can laugh about years later. This isn't one of them. The day we turned study hall into a rodeo. It was supposed to be a normal, boring study hall. You know the kind. 40 minutes of sitting in the cafeteria while the substitute teacher stares at her phone, pretending we don't exist. Nobody ever studies during study hall. We all just try not to die of boredom. And that's exactly what Jake was trying to avoid when he suddenly slammed his notebook shut and said, "This sucks. Let's get a goat." Dave blinked. "A goat?" "Yes." Jake replied with the confidence of a man with zero hesitation and even less sense. "An actual, real-life goat. Let's bring it to study hall. It'll be hilarious." "Where the hell are we going to get a goat?" I asked, already half terrified by how fast this plan was developing. Jake grinned. "From Brian." Now, you need to understand something about Brian. He has connections. Nobody knows how or why, but Brian could get his hands on just about anything. If you needed a fog machine, Brian knew a guy. If you needed a car engine on short notice, Brian had it in his van before you finished asking. So when Jake called Brian and said, "We need a goat," Brian didn't even ask why. He just said, "I know a farm about 10 minutes from here." Dave and I exchanged a look that said, "This is how we die." But it was too late to back out. 40 minutes later, we were standing in the parking lot of some random farm while Brian bartered with a guy named Earl over a goat. Earl, by the way, didn't ask any questions either. He just handed Brian a leash with a very confused-looking goat on the other end and said, "Don't keep it too long. She spooks easy." "This," Dave whispered to me, "is going to end horribly." Jake patted the goat on the head like it was a new puppy. "Nah, it's going to be legendary." And with that, we loaded the goat into Brian's van and drove straight back to school. Like this was a perfectly normal thing to do on a Tuesday morning. We managed to sneak the goat into the cafeteria just as the second half of study hall started. The substitute teacher, a tired-looking woman in a cardigan, didn't even look up as we walked in. "What's the plan now?" Dave whispered as we stood awkwardly in the corner, goat in tow. Jake, still riding high on his bad decisions, shrugged. "I don't know. We just let it loose." Before I could stop him, Jake unhooked the leash. The goat stood still for about 2 seconds, blinking at us like it was trying to process what fresh hell it had just entered. Then, without warning, it bolted. What followed was absolute chaos. The goat ran straight down the center aisle of the cafeteria, knocking over chairs and scattering backpacks. Someone screamed, "Is that a goat?" And within seconds, half the cafeteria was on their feet, yelling and trying to catch it. Kids were diving out of the way like we were under attack, while the goat, clearly having the time of its life, leapt onto a lunch table and started kicking over water bottles and textbooks. One kid tried to grab it by the horns but got headbutt in the stomach and went down like a sack of potatoes. Meanwhile, Jake was doubled over, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "This is amazing," he gasped. Dave was not having as much fun. "We need to stop it. We need to. Oh God, it's heading for the teacher." The substitute, who had been pretending we didn't exist up until this moment, finally looked up just in time to see the goat barrel toward her like a furry freight train. "OH, sweet Jesus," she shrieked, scrambling to her feet and knocking over her chair in the process. The goat, clearly loving the attention, jumped over her desk and bolted for the snack station in the corner. It knocked over the vending machine, sending bags of chips flying everywhere, and started chewing on a sleeve of Oreos like it was its final meal. At this point, the entire cafeteria was in full panic mode. Kids were either laughing uncontrollably or screaming like we'd unleashed a pack of wolves. 2 cheerleaders climbed onto the bleachers for safety, while someone else was throwing apples, trying to distract the goat. Brian, who had been calmly sipping a juice box the entire time, finally stood up and said, "I'll handle this." He marched straight toward the goat, completely unbothered by the madness around him. Just as the goat turned to charge at another student, Brian grabbed it by the horns, gave it a gentle tug, and said, "All right, that's enough, girl." And just like that, the goat calmed down. The entire cafeteria went silent, except for Jake, who was still cackling like a madman in the corner. Just as we thought we were in the clear, the principal stormed into the cafeteria, flanked by 2 security guards. Mr. Haggerty, who was already on thin ice with us from about 10 other incidents, took one look at the goat chewing on an Oreo and lost his mind. "What in the name of God is going on here?" he roared. Jake, grinning ear to ear, threw his hands up in surrender. "It's Spirit Week," he said, as if that explained everything. Mr. Haggerty's eye twitched. "Get that thing out of my school." We tried to leave quietly, but the goat had other plans. Just as Brian tugged it toward the exit, it let out the loudest, most obnoxious bleat I've ever heard. The entire cafeteria erupted into laughter again, and Jake, because he has zero self-control, bleated back at the goat like they were having a conversation. That's when the fire alarm went off. To this day, I have no idea how or why the fire alarm got triggered. Maybe the goat hit the button, maybe it was karma, who knows? All I know is that within minutes, the fire department showed up and had to escort all of us and the goat off school property. Yes, we got a police and fire department escort because of a goat. The aftermath was glorious. Brian returned the goat to the farm with no questions asked, though Earl seemed way too chill about the whole thing. Jake got suspended for a week, as usual, but he wore that suspension like a badge of honor. Meanwhile, the story of the study hall goat incident became instant legend. Teachers told it to incoming freshmen as a cautionary tale, and every time someone heard a fire alarm, they'd joke, "Where's the goat?" And Jake? He still tells the story at every reunion, embellishing the details more and more each time. According to him now, the goat saved us from a fire and became an honorary member of the fire department. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that were true. And you know what? Totally worth it. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the necklace. Not because it was flashy or unusual, just the opposite really. It was small and simple, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. The problem was I didn't give it to him. It was sitting on the nightstand, tangled with his watch and keys, as if it had been tossed there carelessly at the end of the day. At first, I told myself it probably belonged to a friend, maybe a sister or a coworker. I wanted so badly to believe that. But Matt never mentioned anyone leaving it behind. And the longer I stared at it, the harder it was to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. "Hey," I called out casually, holding the necklace up when he came out of the shower. "Whose is this?" He froze for half a second, just long enough for my heart to start pounding in my chest. Then he gave me a quick smile, the kind he used whenever he thought I was being silly. "Oh, that," he said, grabbing a towel and drying his hair. "It's Ava's." I blinked. "Ava? From your office?" He nodded, still not looking at me. "Yeah, she left it in my car the other day. I meant to give it back." The words were smooth, practiced, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. "How did it end up on the nightstand?" I asked, my voice steady but low. He shrugged. "I must have grabbed it with my stuff. Didn't think it was a big deal." It was a perfectly reasonable answer. And yet, it didn't feel reasonable at all. I set the necklace down carefully, as if it might shatter if I looked at it the wrong way. My mind was racing, piecing together every late night, every vague excuse, every moment he had seemed just a little too distracted. We'd been together for 3 years. We were solid, or at least I thought we were. But this tiny, innocent necklace suddenly felt like a wrecking ball, tearing through everything I believed about us. "Are you sure there's nothing going on?" I asked, hating the way my voice sounded, small, desperate. Matt gave me a tired sigh, the kind people give when they think they're being patient, but are really just annoyed. "Ash, come on. You know I'm not like that." And for a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the necklace, dangling like a noose over everything I thought we had. I kept telling myself it didn't mean anything. People leave things behind all the time, right? But at 2 a.m., when Matt was fast asleep beside me, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and searched Ava on Instagram. Her profile was private, but her profile picture told me everything I needed to know. She was wearing the same necklace, and Matt's arm was wrapped around her waist. I stared at the tiny image, my heart hammering in my chest. It was blurry and small, but there was no mistaking it. It was him. His favorite hoodie, his stupid grin, the way he always rested his hand on someone's side like he owned them. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. How long had this been going on? How many times had he kissed me goodnight while thinking about her? I wanted to wake him up, shove the phone in his face, demand answers. But instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, trying to breathe through the betrayal. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I wanted to scream, to throw the necklace at him, to tell him I knew everything. But some part of me wanted to see if he'd admit it on his own. He didn't. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work, like nothing was wrong. Like he wasn't blowing apart everything we'd built together with every lie he told. When the door clicked shut behind him, I knew what I had to do. I packed a bag. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, my laptop, the things I couldn't live without. I wasn't going to wait for him to explain. There was no explanation that would make it better. Before I left, I grabbed the necklace from the nightstand. I slipped it into an envelope, sealed it tight, and scrawled Ava's name across the front. Then I left it on his pillow with a note of my own. "Give this back to the person it really belongs to. And next time, try harder to keep your lies straight. I walked out of that apartment without looking back. He called, of course, dozens of times, but I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his promises to change, his pleas for another chance. Because the truth was I didn't care anymore. I had spent too long waiting for someone who had already chosen someone else. And I wasn't going to wait a second longer. In the weeks that followed, the ache in my chest slowly began to fade. It didn't happen all at once. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when I almost reached for my phone to call him. But every time I felt weak, I reminded myself of the necklace, of the lies, of the way he had looked me in the eye and told me everything was fine, while he was busy building a life with someone else. And little by little, I started to let go. One day, I passed by the apartment we used to share. The curtains were drawn, and for a moment, I wondered if Ava's things were inside now, taking the place of mine. But the thought didn't sting the way it used to, because I knew deep down that leaving was the best thing I ever did. Some people will carry lies with them like luggage, always packing a little extra for the trip. But not me. I travel like now. You ever have one of those moments where you realize your own clothes might be trying to kill you? No. Well, I have, and let me tell you, it was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I know it sounds ridiculous, but there was a point where I genuinely thought I'd be found dead, strangled by my own hoodie. It all started on a chilly Tuesday morning. I was running late for work. One of those, oh crap, I've got 5 minutes to leave situations where you're shoveling cereal into your mouth with one hand while brushing your teeth with the other. I grabbed my favorite hoodie off the back of a chair, thinking it would be a quick and easy way to stay warm. Now, this hoodie is comfy as hell. It's one of those oversized ones that makes you feel like you're wearing a hug. But because it's huge, the inside is like a maze of fabric. Half pocket, half prison cell. If you're not careful putting it on, you can get lost in there. And that's exactly what happened to me. I shoved my head through the hood, but it didn't quite go through the right hole. Instead of slipping my arms into the sleeves, I somehow managed to twist the entire thing halfway around my torso. My arms were stuck halfway in the sleeves. My head was lodged awkwardly against the hood, and I was trapped, completely trapped, like I'd been captured by a sentient piece of clothing. Okay, I muttered to myself, squirming. No big deal. Just untwist it. Easier said than done. Every time I tried to wiggle free, the hoodie got tighter. My left arm was pinned across my chest like I was in some weird jiu-jitsu hold, and my right arm was stuck halfway, behind my back, flailing uselessly. The hood, meanwhile, had bunched up around my face, blocking my vision and smothering me in thick cotton. I felt like I was being waterboarded by a sweatshirt. At this point, I was starting to panic. My breathing got faster, but that only made it worse. The hood tightened around my face like a boa constrictor, and the more I fought it, the more tangled I became. I staggered around the living room like a drunk person trapped in a duvet cover, bumping into furniture and knocking over a lamp. Just calm down, I told myself. It's a hoodie, not a death trap. But then I tried to pull the hood off my face, and it didn't budge. Not even an inch. Somehow, the drawstrings had cinched themselves tight, and no matter how hard I tugged, I couldn't loosen them. I twisted and turned, but the fabric only got tighter, squeezing my arms and chest like it was trying to wring the life out of me. That's when it hit me. I could actually die like this. Alone, in my own living room, strangled by my favorite hoodie. The paramedics would find my body hours later, and the headline would be humiliating. Man found dead after losing battle with sweater. I picture my friends at my funeral struggling to keep a straight face. Someone would probably say, "He always liked that hoodie," and the whole room would burst into laughter. That was not how I wanted to go out. With my heart pounding and sweat pouring down my face, I tried one last, desperate move. I dropped to my knees, curled into a ball, and threw myself backward, hoping the momentum would somehow pop my head free. It did not. Instead, I rolled off the edge of the couch and hit the floor with a thud, landing flat on my back, still tangled like a toddler trying to escape a Halloween costume. Now I was trapped and winded, gasping for breath while the hoodie continued its slow, cottony assassination attempt. I flopped around on the floor like a fish out of water, trying to claw the hood off my face, but my fingers kept slipping on the fabric. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. This was it. I was going to die wearing athleisure. Just as I was about to accept my fate, my roommate came home. She walked in, took one look at me rolling around on the floor, half inside a sweatshirt, half out, and froze. "What the hell are you doing?" she asked, clearly fighting the urge to laugh. "I'm stuck," I wheezed, trying to sound calm, but sounding more like a drowning cat. "Help me." To her credit, she didn't laugh. At least, not right away. She walked over, yanked the hood free from my face in one smooth motion, and stood there, hands on her hips, as I lay on the floor gasping for air like I'd just run a marathon. "You okay?" she asked, grinning. "No," I muttered, still catching my breath. "I was attacked." "By your hoodie?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said, dead serious. "It had intentions." She laughed so hard she had to sit down. And honestly, I couldn't even be mad. I knew how stupid the whole thing looked. But at that moment, all I cared about was the fact that I could finally breathe again. These days, I approach hoodies with a lot more caution. I slide them on slowly, carefully, and I never pull the hood over my head unless I have a clear escape route. If someone hands me a hoodie with drawstrings, I cut them off immediately. Some things just aren't worth the risk. And if anyone ever asks me why I'm weird about hoodies, I just smile and say, let's just say I've been through some things. Because once you've been betrayed by your own clothes, you're never the same. It's a chilly autumn night, and I'm sitting alone at a friend's bonfire party, bundled up in an oversized hoodie, nursing a plastic cup of cider. The fire crackles in front of me, casting a warm glow on the circle of mismatched lawn chairs, while a group of people I don't know very well chatter loudly in the background. I was in the mood for a quiet evening, but somehow I got roped into this gathering, and now I'm wondering if I can slip out without anyone noticing. Just as I'm mapping out my escape route, someone pulls up the empty chair next to mine and plops down with a satisfied sigh, as if they've been waiting all day to sit by a fire. I glance over and catch a glimpse of him in the flickering light, dark jacket, messy hair, and the kind of easy smile that makes you feel like you've already met. He holds a beer bottle loosely in one hand and gives me a quick nod, like we're co-conspirators at this weird social event. "Guess we're the fire people now," he says, tilting his head toward the bonfire. "Let the others have their loud conversations about nothing important." I smirk. "Yeah, this is definitely the better side of the party." "Absolutely," he says, stretching his legs out and wiggling his toes toward the fire. Quiet conversations, snacks within reach, and no small talk about everyone's boring jobs. I laugh, grateful for the easy humor. "So, what do you do for work?" He groans dramatically, tipping his head back like I've just mortally wounded him. "And here I thought you were different." "Sorry," I say, grinning. "I had to." He chuckles, giving me a sideways look. "All right, fine. I design websites. But only because no one's paying me to sit by fires and drink beer." "That's a shame," I say. "You seem pretty good at it, right? It's really my true calling." The conversation flows from there. No awkward pauses, no need to force anything. It's the kind of interaction that feels like it could go on forever without either of us needing to try too hard. We talk about nothing and everything. Weird internet trends, bonfire etiquette, which apparently includes never being the person who pokes the fire too much, and which snack is always the first to disappear at parties. "Gotta be the chips," I say, gesturing toward the empty bag lying abandoned on the grass. "See, you'd think that," he says, raising an eyebrow. "But the real MVP? The brownies. They're already gone, and no one even saw them arrive." I gasp. "Wait, there were brownies? I didn't even get one." He shakes his head, pretending to look disappointed. "You gotta move faster next time. Brownies are ruthless." I laugh, realizing how easy it is to talk to him. How natural it feels to slip into this playful rhythm, like we've been sitting around this fire together for years instead of just a few minutes. At one point, someone for the party calls his name, Ben, and waves him over to the snack table. He glances at me, then back at the crowd, clearly weighing his options. "They'll survive without me," he says with a grin, settling deeper into his chair. "Besides, I think I like this side of the party better." I smile, pulling my hoodie tighter around me as a breeze sends a swirl of sparks into the night air. The fire crackles between us, filling the silence with something that feels nice. Not forced, not awkward, Just the quiet kind of connection that happens when two people decide they don't need to impress each other. So, Jess, he says, glancing over at me. What's your fire philosophy? Fire philosophy? I ask, raising an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. Yeah, every bonfire person has one. Are you a poker? A spark watcher? Or do you just hoard the good seats and guard the snacks? I grin. Definitely a spark watcher. The fire's got to do its own thing. No interference. He taps his beer bottle against his knee, clearly impressed. Respect. That's the right answer. And what about you? I ask, tilting my head. What's your fire strategy? He leans in, lowering his voice like he's sharing a secret. I'm here to stay out of the way and roast the perfect marshmallow. You know, just golden brown. No burn marks. I laugh softly. Bold. No room for error with that strategy. It's a delicate art, he says, pretending to be serious. But when you get it right, it's worth the effort. The fire pops loudly, and we both watch as a few sparks shoot upward, disappearing into the night. It's strange how a random moment with a stranger can feel so familiar, like we've fallen into some easy, unspoken understanding. After a while, the conversation drifts, and we sit in comfortable silence, letting the crackling fire fill the space between us. At some point, I realize I'm no longer thinking about sneaking out of the party. For the first time all night, I feel content right where I am. As the fire starts to die down and the conversations around us grow quieter, Ben shifts in his seat and looks over at me. Hey, he says with that same easy smile. If you ever feel like sitting by another fire, or just grabbing a coffee without having to survive a party first, let me know. He pulls a napkin from his jacket pocket, because apparently that's a thing people still carry, and scribbles something down on it. His name and a number, handed over with a kind of quiet confidence that makes it clear he's not expecting anything, just offering a possibility. I take the napkin, folding it carefully and tucking it into the pocket of my hoodie. Thanks, Ben, I say, smiling. I might just do that. He gives me a little nod, stands up and stretches, his beer bottle still dangling from one hand. See you around, Spark Watcher. See you around, Marshmallow Master, I reply, watching as he wanders back toward the snack table, blending into the glow of the firelight. And yeah, I texted him, because anyone who knows how to roast the perfect marshmallow and can make a bonfire feel like the best part of the night is someone worth getting to know. The job came with minimal details. Client wants to go for a drive. No questions. Midnight pickup. I almost turned it down. Midnight jobs are always a toss-up. Either they're weird or emotional, and I wasn't sure I had it in me for either. But the payment was good, and I needed it, so I said yes. At 11:58 p.m., I was waiting on a quiet corner. The streets empty except for the occasional hum of a passing car. The city felt strange at that hour, like a secret version of itself, quieter and slower, as if it had exhaled after holding its breath all day. Then a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. The passenger window rolled down, and the man behind the wheel gave me a small, tired smile. You must be Jade, he said. Yep, still Jade. Feels like I'll be her forever. That's me, I said, sliding into the passenger seat and clicking my seatbelt. Where are we headed? Just out, he replied. I like to drive. He wasn't what I expected. Mid-40s, maybe, with salt and pepper hair and a soft kind of sadness in his eyes. He wore a dark sweater, casual but neat, and he carried himself with the quiet ease of someone used to being alone. I settled into the seat, watching the city roll by as he eased the car into motion. The lights blurred into streaks against the windows, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The hum of the engine and the faint whoosh of passing cars filled the silence between us, and strangely enough, it didn't feel awkward. So, I said after a while, do you do this often? Late-night drives with strangers? He chuckled softly, the sound barely audible over the hum of the road. Not exactly. Just needed to get out tonight. Thought it might help to have someone along for the ride. No destination in mind? I asked, glancing at him. Not really. He gave a small shrug. Sometimes it's just about moving, you know? Feels like if you keep driving, the noise in your head might quiet down. I nodded, understanding more than I expected to. Yeah, I get that. He smiled, just a flicker of one, but it was real, Good. Thought maybe I was the only one. We drove through the city, the streets stretching out in front of us like ribbons. The buildings gave way to quieter neighborhoods, and soon we were cruising along the waterfront, the black water shimmering under the streetlights. The conversation drifted like the night, light, unhurried. He told me his name was Alex. I told him I like night drives too. Though most of mine involved dodgy Ubers or late-night shifts, I couldn't wait to leave. At one point, Alex turned down a quiet road lined with trees, the branches arching overhead like a tunnel. Used to take this road with my dad, he said almost to himself. When I was a kid, he'd drive us out here, just the two of us, and we wouldn't talk much. Just drove. He fell silent for a moment, his hands loose on the wheel, eyes distant. It was the only time he wasn't distracted. You know what I mean? Like, the only time he was really there. Yeah, I said quietly. I get that. We didn't say much after that. There wasn't a need for it. Some nights, it's enough just to be next to someone who understands the same kind of silence. We drove with the windows down, the cool night air brushing against our skin, and for a little while, it felt like the world outside the car didn't exist. Just the road, the sky, and the quiet hum of the engine. After a while, Alex pulled over by a stretch of beach, parking the car in front of a low wooden fence. The ocean spread out before us, dark and endless, the waves rolling in slow and steady, like they'd been doing that forever and would keep doing it long after we were gone. We sat there in silence, staring out at the water. Alex leaned back in his seat, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath all day. It's been a year today, he said softly. I didn't need to ask what he meant. I could hear it in his voice, the loss, the weight of something too big to carry alone. I'm sorry, I said gently. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. He gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, me too. For a long time, we just sat there listening to the sound of the waves. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It was just still, and sometimes stillness is exactly what you need. After a while, Alex reached into the console and pulled out a flask. He held it out toward me with a small, wry smile. Want some? It's whiskey. Nothing fancy. I took the flask, grateful for the warmth it promised, and took a small sip. The whiskey burned on the way down, but it felt good, like it was filling the empty spaces inside me. I handed it back, and Alex took a sip too, the corner of his mouth twitching into the faintest smile. You're good at this, he said quietly. At what? Being here, he replied, glancing at me. Just being here. I smiled, a soft, genuine smile that felt more like Jade's than mine. You're not so bad at it yourself. We stayed there a little longer, watching the waves roll in and out, like the ocean was breathing right along with us. It felt like the kind of moment you don't try to explain. You just let it be because that's all it needs to be. Eventually, Alex sighed and started the engine. We should head back, he said, though neither of us really wanted to leave. The drive back was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that weighs you down. It was the kind that feels easy, like you found a little piece of peace in a restless world. When he pulled up to my drop-off point, Alex handed me an envelope without a word. I tucked it into my purse, not even glancing at it. This night was about more than money, and we both knew it. Thanks, Jade, he said softly. For everything. Anytime, I said, and I meant it. He gave me a small nod, the kind that says more than words ever could, and I stepped out of the car. The night air felt lighter somehow, like we'd left something heavy back at the beach. As I watched the car pull away, disappearing into the quiet streets, I realized something. Some nights, it's not about where you go. It's just about moving, finding a little space to breathe. And sometimes, all you need is someone to ride along with you, no questions asked. I smiled to myself, pulling my jacket tighter around me as I headed home. Tonight, we found that space. And for now, that was enough. For almost a year now, I've been pretending that I know how to drive a stick shift. My boyfriend? He's obsessed with manual cars. He thinks automatic transmissions are for the weak and talks about rev matching like it's a spiritual experience. Me? I can barely parallel park a regular car without sweating bullets. But somehow, I've managed to convince him that I'm a master behind the wheel of a manual. And now I'm stuck in a mechanical nightmare I can't escape. It all started when we rented a car on vacation. We were in Italy, driving through the countryside, and the rental place only had manuals left. "Perfect," my boyfriend said, grinning from ear to ear. "You drive stick, right?" The correct answer would have been, "Nope, I have no idea what I'm doing." But instead, I panicked and said, "Of course, I love driving stick. I mean, how hard could it be? People do it all the time, right?" Big mistake. Huge. As soon as I got behind the wheel, it became painfully clear that I had no idea what I was doing. I stalled the car within 3 seconds, right in the middle of the rental lot. My boyfriend looked at me, confused. "It's been a while," I said, forcing a laugh. "Guess I'm just a little rusty." He bought it, but instead of taking over the driving like a normal person, he gave me a patient smile and said, "Don't worry, babe. You'll get the hang of it." And that's when I knew I was screwed. I spent the next 2 hours stalling at every stop sign, grinding the gears like I was trying to blend cement, and rolling backward on hills like my life was flashing before my eyes. My boyfriend stayed calm the entire time, offering gentle advice like, "Just ease off the clutch, or you'll feel it when the gear catches." I nodded along, pretending to understand, while internally praying for divine intervention. By some miracle, we made it to our destination without dying or killing the rental car. But now he thinks I love driving manual. He talks about it all the time, how rare it is to find a woman who can drive stick, how sexy it is, how connected to the road it makes you feel. I nod and smile, pretending that I, too, feel connected to the road instead of connected to crippling anxiety. Since that trip, things have only gotten worse. He sold his automatic car and bought a stick shift, which means every time we take his car somewhere, I have to keep up the act. The few times I've managed to avoid driving, I've blamed everything from a weird knee cramp to "I just love when you drive." But last week, he handed me the keys with a grin and said, "You haven't driven it in a while. Why don't you take it for a spin?" I wanted to die. I've developed a system to survive. At stoplights, I pretend I'm adjusting the radio just so I can avoid stalling out. On hills, I yank the handbrake and act like I'm being careful, when in reality, I'm praying I don't roll into the car behind me. And when I do stall, which is often, I blame the sensitive clutch. But now, things have reached a whole new level of disaster. He wants to take us to a track day. A whole day driving manual cars together, he said, practically buzzing with excitement. We'll race, practice shifting, maybe even do some drifting. I'm pretty sure I blacked out for a second. Drifting? I can't even start a stick shift on flat ground without needing a pep talk. I know I need to tell him the truth. I can't keep pretending to be the fast and the furious when in reality, I'm the slow and the panic attack. But how do you admit that you've been lying about something as basic as driving? I imagine sitting him down and saying, "So remember how I said I love driving manual? Yeah, about that. I've actually been flying by the seat of my pants this whole time." What if he's disappointed? What if he never lets me drive his car again? Or worse, what if he insists on teaching me? I can already picture it, hours of stalling, grinding gears, and me crying in frustration while he sits there trying to stay positive. I can't think of anything more humiliating than watching him realize that I am, in fact, a fraud. But here's the thing. As terrifying as driving his car is, I love the way his face lights up when he talks about it. I love how passionate he is about shifting gears and feeling the engine. And even though it makes me want to curl into the fetal position, I love how excited he gets when he thinks I'm right there with him, sharing that passion. So, here's my plan. I'll come clean after the track day. One last ride. I'll stall, grind the gears, and maybe even roll the car backward a few times. But then I'll tell him the truth. Maybe we'll laugh about it. Maybe he'll teach me, and I'll actually get the hang of it. Or maybe I'll just stick to being his permanent passenger, which honestly sounds like the dream. And if all else fails, I'll just blame the clutch. It happened 2 weeks ago. I was house sitting for my sister, Rachel, while she and her husband went on vacation. They'd just bought a place in a quiet neighborhood. One of those cookie-cutter suburbs where every house looks the same and the streets are eerily silent after dark. Rachel's only request was that I stay overnight. "The house feels weird when it's empty," she told me with a nervous laugh. I figured she was just being paranoid. The house was new. Everything felt fresh and untouched. What could possibly go wrong? The first night was uneventful. I made myself some tea, watched TV until I got bored, and crashed in their guest room. But the second night, that was when things got strange. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a weird tapping noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the windows, but the sound was too deliberate. It wasn't random, it had a rhythm. Top, 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 pause it, top, top. The noise was coming from the living room. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch from the tree outside was scraping against the glass. But deep down, something didn't feel right. My heart started to pound, and a strange chill ran down my spine. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my phone, and tiptoed down the hallway toward the living room. The tapping continued, steady and persistent. Top, top, top. I hesitated at the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. I could see the large front window from where I stood, half hidden by the curtains. And there, just behind the glass, I saw it. A face. It was pale, so pale it almost glowed in the moonlight. The skin was smooth, stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were wide, glassy black, and they didn't blink. Its mouth was small and expressionless, almost like it didn't know how to smile. And it was staring directly into the house. My heart lurched. For a moment, I was paralyzed, too scared to move, too scared to even breathe. The figure didn't do anything. It just stood there, inches from the glass, watching. Then it raised one hand and tapped, softly, deliberately, against the window. Top, top, top. The rational part of me screamed to turn on the porch light, grab a weapon, call someone, anything but stand there frozen like an idiot. But I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as it tapped again. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the face shifted. It pulled back into the shadows, melting into the darkness of the front yard like smoke dispersing into the night. I waited, heart hammering in my chest, but it didn't come back. For a long time, I stood there staring at the window, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was some kind of reflection, a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. I told myself I'd call Rachel in the morning, tell her something weird had happened, and let her deal with it. But when morning came, I was too embarrassed to bring it up. I convinced myself it was just some local kid pulling a prank. The next night, I tried to shake off the unease. I double-checked the locks, drew all the curtains, and settled in with a book to distract myself. But around midnight, I heard it again. Top, 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 pause it, top, top. My heart stopped. I wanted to pretend I hadn't heard it, that it was just my imagination. But the sound was unmistakable. It was the same deliberate tapping, soft, measured, insistent. And this time, it was coming from the kitchen window. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the kitchen, my pulse thudding in my ears. The tapping continued as I got closer. I could see the outline of the window through the curtains, the glass shimmering faintly in the darkness. I reached for the curtain, hand shaking. Slowly, I pulled it aside just an inch, just enough to peek through. And there it was, the same pale face, staring in at me with those wide, glassy black eyes. I stumbled back, heart racing, the curtains slipping from my fingers. The tapping stopped, and then the door handle, just a few feet from where I stood, rattled. Something was trying to open it. I bolted down the hallway and locked myself in the guest room, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my sister's number. She picked up on the third ring, groggy and confused. "Hello? Rachel," I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "There's someone outside the house." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. What? What do you mean someone's outside?" "There's a man," I said, panic rising in my throat. "He was at the window. He tried the door handle." Another long pause. "Which window?" Rachel asked, her voice tight. "The front window first, and then the kitchen," I whispered. "Why?" I heard her suck in a breath, as if trying to steady herself. "Listen to me," she said slowly. "The windows, they're too high off the ground." I froze. "What?" "There's no way someone could stand outside and look in," Rachel said. "The windows are too high. They'd need a ladder." My blood ran cold. I knew what I had seen. There had been no ladder, just a face, pressed against the glass, as if it were floating. "Get out of the house," Rachel said, her voice urgent now. "Get out, right now." I grabbed my keys and bolted for the front door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't look back. I didn't check the windows. And as I ran to my car, I swear I heard it, just behind me, carried on the wind. Top, top, top. I haven't gone back to Rachel's house since. She told me later that weird things had happened before. Sounds at night, strange shadows, but she never told me because she didn't want to scare me. But here's the thing. A few nights ago, I heard the tapping again. This time it was at my own apartment. And now, every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear it. Top, 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 top. And I know whatever it is, it's getting closer. The time we tried to steal the school's spirit trophy. Our school took the spirit trophy way too seriously. It was this dumb, shiny plastic thing, probably worth about $10. And every year it was awarded to the class with the most school spirit. Points were earned for winning events, showing up to pep rallies, and wearing school colors during Spirit Week. But the catch? The trophy wasn't handed out until the very last day of the year, and it always sat on display in the main office. It was like our school's version of the Holy Grail. Now Jake, because it's always Jake, got it in his head that we needed to steal it before the seniors officially won it. Not just as a prank, but to declare ourselves the rightful champions of school spirit. Think about it, he said, eyes gleaming like a man possessed. We'll steal the trophy, parade it around the cafeteria, and claim we won. They can't take it back if we've already celebrated. That's not how trophies work, I said, hoping to talk some sense into him. Jake ignored me, naturally. This is the only way, man. We go big or we go home. Dave shook his head. This sounds like a terrible idea. It'll be fine, Jake promised. We'll be in and out in 5 minutes. Spoiler, we were not in and out in 5 minutes. The plan was simple in theory. Sneak into the office during lunch, grab the trophy, and bolt. Easy, right? Wrong. The office was guarded by Mrs. Fletcher, the scariest school secretary on the planet. Mrs. Fletcher had the reflexes of a hawk and the soul of a prison warden. She once made a kid cry just by asking him if he had a hall pass. But Jake? Jake wasn't scared. We just need a distraction, he said. Something big enough to get her out of the office for 2 minutes. That's not going to happen, Dave said flatly. Fletcher never leaves her post. Then we make her leave, Jake replied, grinning like a man who's never suffered consequences. The next day at lunch, we put the plan into motion. Dave and I were in charge of the distraction while Jake waited by the door to the office, ready to strike the moment Mrs. Fletcher left her desk. Our distraction? We pulled the fire alarm. Look, I'm not saying it was a good plan, but Jake said we needed something big, and setting off the fire alarm felt appropriately dramatic. So at exactly 12:15 p.m., Dave yanked the alarm, and we ran for our lives. Chaos erupted instantly. Students flooded the hallways, whooping and yelling like it was the end of the world. Teachers scrambled to get everyone outside. And best of all, Mrs. Fletcher finally left the office, storming out with a clipboard in hand, barking orders like a drill sergeant. This was Jake's moment. As the hallways filled with screaming kids, Jake slipped into the office like a shadow and grabbed the spirit trophy off the shelf. Got it, he whispered into the walkie-talkie we'd borrowed from Brian. Meet me in the cafeteria. Meanwhile, Dave and I were herding students toward the exits to make the fire drill look legit. But just as we thought everything was going smoothly, I heard Jake's panicked voice crackle through the walkie-talkie. Guys? We got a problem. What kind of problem? I whispered. The trophy's bigger than I thought. At that moment, I spotted Jake stumbling out of the office, holding the spirit trophy, which was about 4 feet tall. It was way too big to hide, and the golden panther on top of it wobbled dangerously as he tried to sprint toward the cafeteria without being noticed. To make things worse, Mrs. Fletcher spotted him immediately. You, she screamed, pointing a bony finger at Jake like an avenging angel. Get back here. Jake panicked. He bolted. Now here's the thing. Jake can run pretty fast, but the trophy was heavy as hell, and he was running with it like a drunk giraffe trying to carry a bookshelf. It clanged and rattled with every step, drawing more attention than a marching band in the middle of class. Abort! Abort! I yelled into the walkie-talkie. Jake didn't respond. He was too busy weaving through the crowd like a football player, narrowly dodging Mrs. Fletcher as she tore after him with all the fury of a woman who'd had enough of this shit. The hallways were pure pandemonium. Kids were cheering, not even knowing what they were cheering for, just that something insane was happening. Teachers were trying to regain control, and the fire alarm was still blaring like a soundtrack to our collective bad decisions. Jake finally reached the cafeteria, panting and red-faced, and slammed the spirit trophy down onto one of the tables. He raised his hands in victory. "We won," he shouted, grinning like a man who thought he'd just conquered Everest. The cafeteria erupted in applause. Half the students stood on their chairs, chanting, "Spirit Trophy! Spirit Trophy!" while Jake paraded around like a gladiator who'd just defeated a lion. And then, just as things couldn't get more ridiculous, the cops showed up. Apparently, pulling the fire alarm triggers an automatic call to the police. So as Jake basked in the glow of his victory, 2 officers walked into the cafeteria, looking extremely done with our nonsense. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, hands on his hips. Jake, without missing a beat, grinned and said, "It's school spirit, officer." The cop blinked. "You stole a trophy?" "No," Jake replied, still riding the high of the moment. "We liberated it." Mrs. Fletcher arrived just in time to watch Jake get escorted out of the cafeteria by both officers. She looked more smug than I've ever seen her, like a cat that had finally caught the mouse. Jake, of course, went quietly, but as he was being dragged out the doors, he turned around, raised one hand like a rock star on his farewell tour, and shouted, "Long live the Spirit Trophy." The cafeteria exploded in cheers again. In the end, Jake got suspended for a week and banned from all future school events. The Spirit Trophy was returned to the office, where it remained under Mrs. Fletcher's watchful eye until graduation. But the story? That never died. Years later, people still talk about the day Jake liberated the Spirit Trophy. And every time we get together, Jake raises a glass, smiles that devilish grin, and says, "Worth it." And honestly, he's not wrong. It started with a crumpled receipt, one of those long, unnecessary things that list every little item in painful detail. I wasn't looking for anything suspicious. I just found it tucked into the pocket of Matt's jacket while I was doing laundry. At first, I almost threw it away without reading it. I wasn't that person. I didn't check his texts or track his location or go through his things. But something about the way it was folded, like he'd shoved it in there in a hurry, made me pause. I smoothed out the paper and scanned it quickly, expecting to see something ordinary. Gas, groceries, a coffee maybe. But that wasn't what I found. It was a receipt from a fancy restaurant, one I didn't recognize, a place Matt had never mentioned. And the timestamp? Last Thursday night. The same Thursday night he told me he was working late. I stared at the receipt, the knot in my stomach tightening. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and dessert. A romantic dinner for 2. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a work dinner, maybe he was meeting a friend, but the little voice in the back of my mind, the one I'd been ignoring for months, whispered the truth. This wasn't just dinner. This was something else. I folded the receipt carefully and slipped it back into his jacket, my hands shaking. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers. But a part of me wasn't ready yet. I needed more. Over the next few days, I watched Matt more closely. The way he kept his phone face down on the counter, the way he suddenly had so many late meetings, the way he seemed distracted even when we were together. It was like living with a stranger I hadn't noticed moving in. I told myself to wait, to gather more proof before saying anything. But the waiting nearly drove me insane. Every time his phone buzzed, every time he left the room to answer a call, I felt my chest tighten. And then, just like that, the moment came. The following Thursday, Matt told me the same story. "Sorry, babe. Late meeting tonight. I'll be home around 10. He kissed me on the forehead, just like always, and walked out the door. But this time, I wasn't staying home. As soon as he left, I grabbed my coat and slipped out after him, keeping my distance as I followed him through the streets. My heart pounded in my ears, every step feeling heavier than the last. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't. I followed him all the way to the restaurant from the receipt. Through the window, I saw him, sitting at a table, smiling that easy, familiar smile. And sitting across from him was a woman. She leaned forward, laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They looked comfortable, intimate, like two people who knew each other well. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't move. I just stood there on the sidewalk, watching the life I thought we had unravel in front of me. The woman reached across the table and brushed a piece of hair from Matt's forehead, something I used to do. And he let her. That was all I needed to see. I walked away, my heart pounding and my vision blurred with tears. I didn't confront him. I didn't make a scene. I knew that no amount of yelling or crying would change what I'd just seen. Matt had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. When he came home later that night, I was waiting for him. He walked in, kissed me on the forehead, and smiled. "Long day," he said, kicking off his shoes. I'm exhausted. I stared at him, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness wash over me. He was so comfortable in his lies, so sure I had no idea. "Did you enjoy dinner?" I asked quietly. His smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face. "What?" "Dinner," I repeated, my voice steady. "At that little restaurant with your co-worker. Was it good?" Matt's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I followed you," I said before he could come up with an excuse. "I saw you. I saw her." The silence between us was deafening. "I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Don't," I said softly. "I don't want to hear it." He looked at me, desperate and guilty, but I was done. "I deserve better than this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "And I'm done pretending I don't." I grabbed my bag, already packed and waiting by the door. I didn't need to hear his apologies or excuses. I didn't need him to promise he'd change, because I knew better now. Matt followed me to the door. Panic etched across his face. "Ash, wait, please. Don't go. It was a mistake. I swear it didn't mean anything." I turned to face him, the weight of everything I'd seen pressing down on me. "It meant enough for you to lie," I said quietly. "That's all I need to know." And with that, I walked out. The first night alone was hard. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to make sense of everything. But some things don't make sense. Some betrayals just are like cracks in a mirror you can't fix, no matter how hard you try. In the days that followed, Matt tried to reach out, calls, texts, voicemails filled with promises and apologies. But I never answered. There was nothing left to say. One day, while unpacking in my new place, I found the crumpled receipt tucked into the bottom of my bag. I held it for a moment, turning it over in my hands. Then I tore it in half and tossed it in the trash, because some things are better left behind, and so am I. It started with a phone call late one night. I was already in bed, half asleep, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore calls like that, but it was almost 2 a.m., and I thought it might be important. Maybe a friend stuck somewhere, or someone needing help. I answered groggily. "Hello." For a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end, just static, soft and distant like a bad connection. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A voice. "Hello," it whispered, barely audible, as if the person was speaking from far, far away. Who is this?" I asked, sitting up a little in bed. The voice didn't respond right away. It was faint, almost like it wasn't coming through the phone at all, but from somewhere else. Then, after a long pause, it whispered again. "Please, I need help." A chill ran down my spine. The voice was strange, distorted like someone speaking underwater. And there was something about it that felt wrong. "Who are you?" I repeated, more awake now, my heart starting to race. There was another long silence. Then, in a soft, broken whisper, the voice said, "It's so dark here. Please, can you come?" I felt cold all over. "Where are you?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. The line crackled, and I thought I heard something else in the background, a faint sound like footsteps or someone breathing. Then the voice came again, weaker this time. "They won't let me leave." My stomach dropped. "I think you have the wrong number," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. I can't help you." There was a pause. Then, in a whisper so soft I could barely hear it, the voice said, "You're the only one who answered." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse thudding in my ears. For a moment, I thought about calling the number back, but something deep inside me told me not to. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just some prank or a wrong number, someone messing around late at night. But as I lay back down, I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. The way it sounded, not like someone lost, but like someone trapped and desperate. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I tried to look up the number that had called me. But when I checked my call log, it wasn't there. At first, I thought I must have imagined the whole thing. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I hadn't. I had answered the call. I had heard that voice. The next night, just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, my phone buzzed again. It was the same unknown number. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to answer, but my thumb hovered over the screen, as if something was compelling me to. Before I knew it, I hit accept and brought the phone to my ear. Hello! This time, there was no static, just silence. Then the voice came again. You shouldn't have answered. The line cut out, and my bedroom plunged into an eerie, heavy silence. I sat there, holding the phone, my heart racing in the darkness. For a long moment, nothing happened. No more calls, no strange sounds, just silence. And then, from somewhere inside the room, I heard a soft, slow tap. Tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from the closet. I stared at the closed closet door, frozen in place, too terrified to move. The tapping came again, soft, deliberate, like someone was knocking from the inside. Hello, a voice whispered, barely audible. It was the same voice from the phone. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and sprinted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night on the couch. Every light in the apartment turned on, my hands shaking as I stared at the door to my bedroom. The next day, I called my landlord and told him there was something wrong with the apartment. I didn't care how crazy I sounded. I needed to leave. I moved out that same week. But sometimes, late at night, I'll get a notification on my phone. A missed call from a number that isn't saved in my contacts. And every time, I know it's the same voice, waiting for me to answer again. I never do. Not anymore. This is the most humiliating thing that's ever happened to me. And trust me, I've done some pretty stupid things in my life. I should have known from the start that meeting up with my ex, Jess, was a terrible idea. But no, I had to be that guy. The one who thinks, sure, we can totally stay friends. What's the worst that could happen? Spoiler, everything. It had been about 6 months since Jess and I broke up. We've been together for almost 2 years, and the breakup wasn't awful, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. It was one of those slow burn breakups. Lots of little arguments that piled up until we both knew it was over. After a couple of months of no contact, Jess reached out with a text. Hey, want to catch up sometime? Just as friends. Now, any sane person would have left that message on read and moved on with their life. But not me. I thought, sure, I can totally handle that. We're adults. We can be friends. So I agreed to meet her for coffee, thinking it would be a quick, polite conversation about life, jobs, and new relationships. Instead, Jess invited me over to her apartment because, as she put it, it's more chill than a coffee shop. Warning bells should have gone off in my head, but instead I thought, what's the harm? Yeah, I was an idiot. I showed up at her apartment, and everything seemed fine at first. We sat on the couch, catching up on life. Jess looked great, better than I remembered, which immediately made me feel like I had lost some unspoken competition. She laughed at my jokes, I laughed at hers, and for a split second, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't such a terrible idea after all. Then she broke out the wine. 1 glass turned into 2, and before I knew it, we were laughing way too much and sitting way too close. I could feel the old chemistry creeping back, but I told myself it's just nostalgia. Nothing's going to happen. We're over. Then Jess gave me that look, the one that used to mean you're in trouble, but in a fun way. And instead of leaving like a responsible adult, I stayed exactly where I was. You probably think this story is headed toward the two of us hooking up. I wish that were the case, because what actually happened was way, way worse. About an hour into the conversation, the wine hit me hard. My stomach grumbled in a way that made it clear I needed to use the bathroom. Like, immediately. Hey, where's your bathroom? I asked casually, hoping to play it cool. Jess waved toward the hallway. First door on the left. Cool, be right back. I made my way to the bathroom, closed the door, and let out a breath. Disaster averted, at least for now. But as I reached for the toilet handle, things took a horrifying turn. The toilet didn't flush. I stared at it, panic creeping in. I jiggled the handle. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. The water just sat there, unmoving, mocking me with every second that passed. Okay, no big deal, I thought. You can fix this. Just open the tank and... Nope. The tank was one of those modern, weird, sealed units that had no obvious way to open it. At this point, sweat was starting to form on my forehead. Okay, plan B. Get out of here before anyone notices. But when I tried to unlock the bathroom door, the knob refused to turn. That's right. I was locked in the bathroom. I stared at the doorknob, willing it to work, but it stayed stubbornly stuck. I turned it, jiggled it, pulled on it, nothing. I even tried kicking the door gently, because obviously violently kicking my ex's bathroom door would somehow be worse. Still no luck. At this point, my anxiety was going through the roof. I was trapped in the bathroom of my ex-girlfriend's apartment, with a non-flushing toilet as my only companion. I tried calling out, Jess? I think your door's stuck. Really? She called back from the living room. Just jiggle it. I did jiggle it. Well, jiggle it harder. I tried again, but the door refused to budge. And that's when I realized I was going to have to explain everything. The toilet, the door, all of it. Also, the toilet's kind of broken. I muttered through the door, hoping she wouldn't hear me. Wait, what? She asked, suddenly much closer to the door. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Yeah, it's not flushing. There was a long, painful pause. Are you kidding me? No. I heard her sigh heavily. Hold on, I'm getting the toolbox. The next few minutes were a blur of humiliation. Jess tried to unlock the door from the outside while I stood there in bathroom purgatory, wondering how my life had come to this. Eventually, she managed to jimmy the lock open, and the door swung wide to reveal her standing there, toolbox in hand, with a mixture of amusement and annoyance on her face. You broke my toilet and got locked in the bathroom? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I gave her the most pitiful smile I could muster. Yeah, pretty much. She shook her head, clearly trying not to laugh. You're unbelievable. I helped her try to fix the toilet, which of course, only made things worse. In the end, she had to call her landlord to come deal with it. While we waited for him to show up, we sat on the couch in awkward silence, sipping wine that neither of us really wanted anymore. When the landlord finally left, after giving me a look that said, "What is wrong with you, man?" I decided it was time to leave. Well, thanks for having me over, I said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Jess smirked, leaning against the doorframe. You know, for a second there, I thought we might hook up tonight. But instead, you broke my toilet. I laughed nervously. Yeah, that's kind of my thing, ruining good opportunities. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. Good night, idiot. Good night. And that was the last time I ever tried to stay friends with an ex. To this day, every time I pass a modern toilet, I get a little nervous. And whenever someone brings up reconnecting with an ex, I tell them one thing: don't do it, especially if there's wine involved. The job came through late in the afternoon. Client wants to meet at a 24-hour diner. Table 6. No specifics given. I almost turned it down. Diner meetups always felt strange, like something out of a bad noir movie, sitting in a vinyl booth with someone spilling their life story over coffee and pancakes. But things have been slow lately, and the rent wasn't going to pay itself. So I said yes. The diner was tucked away on a corner where the streetlights flickered, casting dim yellow pools onto the wet pavement. A neon open 24 hours sign buzzed faintly in the window. Inside, it smelled like old coffee, syrup, and bacon grease. A strangely comforting combination, like a place that had seen 1,000 lonely nights and survived every single one. I found table 6 by the window. He was already there, hunched over a cup of coffee, stirring it absently with a spoon. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair, a scruffy beard, and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he hadn't slept in days. When I slid into the booth across from him, he looked up, startled for a second, then gave me a small, uncertain smile. "You're Jay?" "That's me," I said, offering a soft smile of my own. "And you are?" "Caleb," he said, glancing back down at his coffee like it might offer him answers. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course." I shrugged off my jacket and settled into the booth. "So, what brings us to a diner at midnight?" Caleb smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. I didn't know where else to go. There was a weight in his voice, a kind of heaviness that clung to the edges of his words. I didn't push. I've learned that if someone wants to tell you their story, they will. All you have to do is wait. The waitress came by, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Debbie. "What can I get you too?" she asked, not unkindly. "Coffee," I said, "and maybe a piece of pie." Caleb glanced up. "Same for me." Debbie gave us a knowing smile, like she'd seen it all before, and shuffled off toward the kitchen. Caleb stirred his coffee again, though he hadn't taken a sip. "Do you ever just feel stuck?" he asked, his voice low, almost like he was embarrassed to say it out loud. "All the time," I admitted. "Feels like life's on a loop sometimes, doesn't it?" He nodded slowly, as if I'd put into words something he'd been carrying around for a while. "I thought I'd have things figured out by now. I mean, I've got a decent job, an okay apartment, but every day feels the same, and I keep wondering if this is all there is." "Yeah," I said softly. "It sneaks up on you, doesn't it? That feeling." Caleb gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, like you wake up one day and realize you've been living the same day for years, but you didn't notice until it was too late." I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "So, what do you do when that happens?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged, tracing patterns on the table with his finger. "I came here, I guess. Just needed to sit with someone. Talk. Pretend, for a little while, that I'm not stuck." "That's fair," I said. "Sometimes, that's all you need." Debbie returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and 2 slices of pie. Apple, with a little scoop of vanilla ice cream on the side. Caleb gave her a polite nod, and we dug in quietly. The only sounds the clink of forks against plates and the low hum of a radio playing somewhere in the kitchen. The pie was surprisingly good. Warm, sweet, just the right amount of cinnamon. I caught Caleb sneaking a small smile after his first bite, and I couldn't help but grin. "See," I said, "pie makes everything better." He laughed, a real laugh this time, soft and easy. "You might be right about that." For a little while, we just ate and talked about nothing really. Movies we'd seen, shows we kept meaning to watch but never did, how neither of us could ever find matching socks no matter how many times we did laundry. It felt normal, like 2 old friends catching up, even though we'd only just met. And somewhere between the coffee and the pie, the heaviness between us started to lift just a little. At one point, Caleb leaned back in the booth and let out a long breath, like the kind you take when you've been holding something in for too long. "You know," he said quietly, "I think this is the first time in months I've felt okay." I gave him a small smile. "That's a good start." He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. "You're good at this," he said softly. "At what?" "Being here, making things feel lighter." I smiled, feeling something warm settle in my chest. "That's the goal." We sat there a little longer, letting the night stretch out like an old sweater. Familiar and a little frayed, but comforting in its own way. The world outside the diner felt far away, like we'd found a little pocket of stillness that didn't belong to anyone but us. Eventually, Caleb glanced at the clock and sighed. "I guess I should head home," he said, though he didn't sound in a hurry to leave. "Yeah," I agreed. "Me too." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "For your time," he said, almost apologetically. I took it without a word, tucking it into my bag. As we stood up, Caleb hesitated, then gave me a small, almost shy smile. "Thanks, Jade. For tonight." "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. We stepped out into the quiet night, the air cool and crisp against our skin. The city felt softer somehow, like it had let down its guard for just a moment. Caleb gave me a little wave before walking off down the street, his hands stuffed into his pockets. I watched him disappear into the night, feeling oddly content. Sometimes all people need is a little company, just someone to sit with them, share a slice of pie, and remind them that they're not as alone as they think they are. And maybe, just maybe, That's enough. As I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, I smiled to myself. Tonight it was enough. It's one of those frustrating afternoons where the day just won't go as planned. I've been running errands all over town, and now I'm standing in the checkout line at a bookstore, waiting way too long to buy a single paperback. The line is barely moving, and I'm stuck between a display of journals I don't need and a rack of bookmarks with motivational quotes I can't take seriously. Believe in yourself like a cat believes in knocking things over? Okay, sure. I'm thumbing through my book absent-mindedly when I hear someone behind me let out a small, dramatic sigh. I glance over my shoulder, and there he is, a guy about my age, wearing a denim jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He's got a mischievous kind of smile, like he's already in on a joke the rest of the world hasn't caught up to yet. Is this the line for people who've completely lost faith in ever getting to the front? He asks, shifting his weight like we've been waiting for hours instead of minutes. I laugh, caught off guard by how easily he jumps into conversation. Yeah, welcome. We're all here to contemplate our life choices. Fantastic, he says, stepping forward as the line shuffles a tiny inch. At least we're in good company. He nods toward the book I'm holding, a novel with a bright cover and a title that's a little too quirky for its own good. That's a good one, he says. I read it a couple months ago. Completely ruined my productivity for a week. I raise an eyebrow. Ruined your productivity? That's a glowing endorsement. He grins. What can I say? I like living dangerously. Besides, who needs to get things done when you've got good fiction? There's something so casual, so easy about the way he talks, like this conversation was always meant to happen. I glance down at his hands. He's holding a small stack of books, mostly novels, with one slightly beat-up poetry collection on top. You've got an eclectic mix there, I say, nodding toward his haul. He shrugs, looking down at the stack like it just materialized out of nowhere. Yeah, I have zero self-control. I came in for one thing, and now I'm walking out with half the store. I guess it's a form of optimism. Optimism? Yeah, he says, smiling. Like maybe this is the weekend I actually read 5 books in 2 days. Spoiler, it never is. I laugh again, and it's the kind of laugh that feels like slipping into an old, comfortable rhythm, even though we've only just met. The line inches forward, and we shuffle along with it. Both of us clearly in no rush to break the flow of conversation. So what's the plan? He asks, tilting his head. You read that book and disappear from the world for a bit. Or are you one of those people who can pace themselves? Definitely not a pacer, I admit. If it's good, I'll probably finish it in one sitting and regret it immediately. He nods knowingly. The binge and regret method. Classic. We're at the front of the line now, but neither of us seems eager to wrap things up. The cashier waves me forward, and as I set my book on the counter, he glances over at me again, that mischievous smile still lingering on his face. Hey, he says as casually as if we've known each other for years. If you ever need someone to talk books with, or just an excuse to blow off your to-do list, I know a good coffee shop nearby. He pulls a receipt from his stack of books and jots down his number with a quick flourish, handing it over with the same easy energy he's carried through the whole conversation. No pressure, no awkwardness, just a simple offer left entirely in my hands. I take the receipt, smiling as I tuck it into my bag. Thanks, I say. I might just take you up on that. He gives me a little wave as he steps toward the next cashier, his books tucked under one arm like old friends. See you around, binge reader. See you around, optimistic book hoarder. I reply, grinning as I grab my bag and head out the door. And yeah, I texted him, because anyone who can make waiting in line feel like the most fun part of my day is definitely someone worth getting to know. A few months ago, some friends and I decided to go on a hiking trip deep in the mountains. We've been talking about it for a while, getting out of the city, disconnecting from our phones, and spending a weekend in nature. It was supposed to be fun, just the 5 of us, hiking to a remote spot and setting up camp near a hidden lake that hardly anyone knew about. We started early, the sun just rising over the mountains, and for the first few hours, everything went smoothly. The forest was beautiful, tall pines swaying in the breeze, birds chirping overhead, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. We followed a narrow trail that wound through the woods, occasionally pausing to check the map or snap photos. But sometime around mid-afternoon, we realized we were off the trail. It wasn't a huge deal at first. It's easy to get turned around when you're deep in the woods, and we figured we'd backtrack a bit and find the right path again. But the deeper we went, the more everything started to look the same. Endless trees and twisting undergrowth, with no markers to guide us back. One of my friends, Dave, pulled out his phone to check the GPS. No signal. None of us had any service. That's when we noticed the forest had gone silent. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but after a few minutes, I realized it wasn't. The birds were gone, and the usual hum of insects had vanished. The air felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. "Let's just keep moving," Dave said, trying to sound confident. "We'll hit the trail eventually." But he didn't sound sure. We kept walking, hoping to find the path. But with every step, the trees seemed to grow closer together, their branches tangled like claws. The sky, which had been bright and sunny just an hour ago, was now overcast, and a chill settled in the air. That's when we saw him, a man standing just a few yards ahead of us on the trail. He was dressed like a hiker, heavy boots, a flannel shirt, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. But there was something off about him. His clothes were old, worn almost to shreds, and his hair hung in matted clumps around his pale face. We all stopped in our tracks, staring at him. "Hey man, you lost too?" Dave called out. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, perfectly still, his head tilted slightly to the side, as if he was listening to something we couldn't hear. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something about the way he stood there, too rigid, too lifeless, made my skin crawl. "Do you know the way back to the trail?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. The man slowly raised his hand and pointed down the path. But there was no expression on his face, just that eerie, blank stare. "Thanks," Dave muttered, though the rest of us exchanged uneasy glances. We walked past the man, keeping our distance, but as we moved by him, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. His boots weren't touching the ground. They hovered just a few inches above the dirt, as if he was standing on nothing at all. I grabbed Dave's arm, whispering urgently, "Did you see that?" "See what?" he whispered back, glancing nervously over his shoulder. The man, he wasn't standing on the ground. Dave's face paled, but he shook his head. "Let's just keep moving." We hurried down the path, putting as much distance as we could between us and the strange man. But no matter how far we walked, the feeling of being watched never went away. And then, just as the sun began to set, we saw him again. The same man, standing at the edge of the trail, just ahead of us, exactly where he'd been before. I felt my heart lurch in my chest. It wasn't possible. We'd been walking for miles. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of us. He tilted his head again, that same eerie motion, and pointed down the path once more. "Let's go," Dave whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just keep moving." We walked past the man again, and this time, I kept my eyes on him the whole way. His gaze never wavered, never blinked. And once again, his boots hovered just above the ground. We didn't stop until we reached a clearing where we could set up camp for the night. None of us said much as we pitched our tents, too shaken by what we'd seen. Dave tried to act like everything was fine, but I could tell he was just as scared as the rest of us. That night, I lay awake in my tent, listening to the silence pressing in from the forest. Every little sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, made my heart race. And then I heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps circling our camp. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent, and for a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, in a low, whispering voice, I heard, "Come with me." I squeezed my eyes shut, too terrified to move, and waited for what felt like hours. Eventually, the footsteps moved away, fading into the woods. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, we packed up and hiked as fast as we could, desperate to get out of the forest. And just as we reached the main trail, we saw him one last time. He stood at the edge of the clearing, watching us with that same blank expression. And then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you see when someone knows something you don't, something you really don't want to know. We didn't say a word. We just turned and ran, not stopping until we were back at the car. To this day, I don't know what that thing was or why it wanted us to follow it. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I hear footsteps outside my window. And I know, deep down, that if I ever follow them, I won't come back. For the last year, I've been pretending to be really into horror movies. My boyfriend? He's obsessed. Slashers, haunted houses, found footage. If it has jump scares and creepy music, he's all in. Me? I sleep with the bathroom light on after watching Scooby-Doo. But I wanted to impress him, so I lied. I told him, "Oh yeah, horror is my favorite genre." And now I'm trapped in a terrifying web of late-night marathons and blood-soaked nightmares. It all started on one of our first dates. He suggested a movie night, and I figured, how scary can it really be? I was imagining something mild. Maybe Scream, or one of those so-bit-it's funny B-movies. No, he picked Hereditary. If you've seen it, you know. If you haven't, good for you. That movie ruined me. I spent 2 hours gripping a pillow for dear life, my heart pounding as demonic children did unspeakable things on screen. At one point, I pretended to get a phone call just so I could leave the room and breathe into a paper bag. But when it was over and he turned to me with those hopeful eyes and said, "What did you think?" I smiled, gave him a thumbs up and said I loved it. And just like that, I sealed my fate. Now, every Friday night is horror movie night. We've watched them all. The Conjuring, Midsommar, The Babadook, and some indie ones so disturbing they probably should have come with a therapist's business card. Meanwhile, I've become a master of pretending I'm totally fine. I perfected my "this isn't scaring me" face, even when I'm mentally making plans to salt the windows and buy a cross. It's not just the movies either. He listens to horror podcasts on the way to work, and I have to act like I'm super into discussions about cursed dolls and unsolved murders. He reads articles about underrated foreign horror films, and I nod along, pretending I didn't just Google, "Is it possible to die from fear?" The worst part? He loves how fearless I am. "You're the bravest person I know," he told me once after I made it through The Exorcist without visibly shaking. I was shaking on the inside. Most people get freaked out, but not you. I wanted to tell him that the only reason I survived that movie was because I'd spent half of it scrolling through memes with the sound off. But instead, I just smiled and said, "Yeah, horror doesn't really bother me. It bothers me. It bothers me a lot. I've lost count of how many nights I've spent lying awake, convinced that every creak of the apartment was a demon coming to collect my soul. I've started sleeping with earplugs just so I don't hear weird noises in the night. And last week, I made him watch Toy Story with me, just to cleanse my brain from all the evil. He thought it was cute. Little does he know, it was an emergency mental reset. And now he wants to go to a haunted house attraction. "You're going to love it," he said, practically vibrating with excitement. They really go all out. Actors in costumes, chainsaws, strobe lights, the works. I'm not going to love it. I'm going to have a heart attack in the parking lot. But what am I supposed to do? Tell him the truth now. After a whole year of pretending to be the horror queen, I've considered every possible excuse to get out of it. Sudden illness, work emergency, allergic reaction to fake blood. But every time I think about bailing, I picture the look on his face when he realizes I've been lying this whole time. So here's my plan. I'm going to survive the haunted house. Somehow. I'll scream if I have to, cry if I must, but I'll get through it. And then, once we're safely back in the car and I've caught my breath, I'll come clean. I'll tell him the truth. That I hate horror movies, that every time I see a ghost on screen, I make peace with my ancestors, and that the only reason I've gone along with all of this is because I love him. And maybe, just maybe, he'll laugh and say, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Or maybe he'll insist on watching one last horror movie for old time's sake. Either way, I'll finally be free. Until then, I'll just keep smiling through the fear. And if a chainsaw-wielding clown chases me in that haunted house, well, I'm faking a faint and calling it a night. I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, but this one takes the cake. All I had to do was house sit for a weekend, feed the cat, water the plants, and sleep in a comfy, empty apartment. Simple, right? No, not when it's your crush's apartment, and you're too dumb to follow the basic rule of house sitting. Do not invite anyone over. This is how I went from a responsible cat sitter to a cautionary tale in one very messy night. The girl's name was Zoe. We'd been in the same friend group for years, and I'd had a not-so-secret crush on her since the day we met. She was funny, gorgeous, and effortlessly cool in a way that made me feel like a total dork every time I was around her. We were just friends, but I always hoped that one day, maybe that would change. So when Zoe asked me to house sit for her while she went out of town, I jumped at the chance. Of course, I said, trying not to sound too eager. Anything for you. She smiled. You're the best. If only she knew how badly I was about to screw it up. The first night went smoothly. I fed her cat, an ancient, grumpy tabby named Mr. Whiskers, watered her plants, and made myself at home. Her apartment was cozy, with fairy lights draped across the ceiling and an absurd number of throw pillows on the couch. I kicked back, put on Netflix, and thought I could get used to this. For a brief moment, I felt like I was living her life, and it was perfect. Then my friend Nate texted. Nate, yo, what are you up to tonight? Me, house sitting for Zoe, chilling with her cat. Nate, no way. You're at Zoe's place? Let's hang out. Now, any sane person would have told him no. But here's the thing about Nate. He's that friend who turns boring nights into epic ones. He's also the kind of guy who makes terrible ideas sound like genius plans. Just come over for a bit. I texted back. But no drinking. I'm responsible for this place. Famous last words. Nate showed up an hour later with a 6-pack of beer. Just one drink, he said with a grin. To keep it chill. We cracked open the beers, put on some music, and played with Mr. Whiskers, who seemed slightly less grumpy after sniffing Nate's shoes for 5 minutes straight. Everything was fine until Nate pulled out a vape and asked, So, want to invite a couple more people over? I knew deep in my soul that this was a terrible idea. But the beer was starting to kick in, and Nate had that devilish grin that always made me feel like saying no would make me the lamest person alive. What's the harm? I muttered, already regretting it. 20 minutes later, 2 of Nate's friends showed up, and then they invited a couple more people. Before I knew it, there were 8 people crammed into Zoe's living room, laughing, drinking, and listening to music way too loud for 11 p.m. I told myself it was fine. We weren't doing anything too crazy. I'd clean up, and Zoe would never know. Then someone suggested we play a drinking game. Things went downhill fast. Nate challenged me to a shotgunning contest, which I lost spectacularly. One of his friends tripped over the coffee table, nearly smashing one of Zoe's carefully curated houseplants. Mr. Whiskers hissed at everyone and disappeared under the couch, probably plotting my murder. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Nate, in his infinite wisdom, decided it would be hilarious to try on one of Zoe's sweaters, a bright pink, oversized monstrosity that she somehow made look fashionable. On Nate, it looked ridiculous. Everyone was howling with laughter as he paraded around the apartment like he was on a catwalk. And that's when Zoe FaceTimed me. I froze. Everyone else went quiet, realizing exactly how bad things had just gotten. Nate, still wearing the pink sweater, whispered, "Don't answer it." But it was too late. I had already swiped to answer. Zoe's smiling face appeared on the screen, and for one blissful second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could fake my way through this. "Hey," I said, trying to act casual. "How's the trip?" Her smile faltered slightly. "It's good, but what's going on there?" "It sounds loud." My brain scrambled for a lie. Just watching a movie. The sound system's kinda loud. No big deal." Then Nate walked behind me, still wearing her sweater, and waved at the camera. "Jo, Foy, love the sweater." Her expression went from confused to furious in an instant. "Is that, Nate, in my sweater?" I tried to think of an excuse, but my brain short-circuited. "Are there people in my apartment?" she asked, her voice rising. "No." "Well, yes, but..." She cut me off. "You're supposed to be house-sitting." I know. I'm sorry." "I'm on my way back right now," she snapped. "You better get everyone out of there before I get home." And with that, she hung up. What followed was absolute chaos. Nate yanked off the sweater, tossed it on the couch, and started gathering bottles like his life depended on it. "Okay, everyone, time to go," I shouted, shoving people toward the door. Mr. Whiskers emerged from under the couch just long enough to glare at me, clearly judging my life choices. I didn't blame him. Within 5 minutes, the apartment was empty except for me, Nate, and the overwhelming smell of stale beer. I frantically wiped down the counters, picked up empty cans, and tried to fluff the throw pillows back into shape. "Do you think she'll notice?" Nate asked, tossing the last beer can into the trash. "She's going to murder me," I muttered, trying to fish Mr. Whiskers out from under the couch so Zoe wouldn't think I lost her cat too. Zoe showed up 30 minutes later, and the second she walked through the door, I knew I was doomed. She took one look around the room, at the slightly crooked houseplant, the wrinkled sweater, and the suspiciously damp carpet, and shook her head. "You had one job," she said, crossing her arms. "I know," I groaned. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, it looked like she might actually laugh, like maybe, just maybe, she found the whole thing slightly amusing. But then Mr. Whiskers chose that exact moment to vomit on the rug, and whatever sympathy she might have had vanished instantly. "Get out," she said, pointing toward the door. I left without another word, Nate trailing behind me with a sheepish grin. To this day, I still haven't lived it down. Every time I see Zoe at a party, she gives me that look, the one that says, "You ruined my trust and my cat's dignity in one night." And Nate? He thinks it's the funniest story ever. He tells everyone about the time I got us kicked out of Zoe's apartment, conveniently leaving out the part where it was mostly his fault. Some mistakes follow you forever. This one? Yeah, it's gonna haunt me for a long time. The earrings were small, dainty little gold hoops. At first, I didn't think much of them. They were lying on the bathroom sink, half tucked behind the soap dispenser, like they had been left there by accident. The problem was they weren't mine. I stared at them for a long time, my mind racing. They weren't anything flashy, just plain hoops, but I knew every piece of jewelry I owned. I wasn't a gold kind of person anyway. I always wore silver. And these? They didn't belong to me. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they belonged to a friend? But the only women who ever came over were my sister and Matt's mom, and neither of them wore tiny gold hoops. Still, I left them on the sink, waiting for Matt to say something when he got home. He never did. That night, while we were getting ready for bed, I watched him closely. He was brushing his teeth, same as always, acting like everything was normal. I kept waiting for him to glance at the earrings, to say, "Oh, I found these earlier. Do they belong to you?" But he didn't. He dried his hands, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and crawled into bed like nothing had happened. And that was the moment I knew. The earrings stayed on the sink for 3 more days. I kept hoping Matt would notice them, but every time he went into the bathroom, he acted like they weren't even there. I felt like I was going crazy, walking by them over and over, waiting for an explanation that never came. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, while he was scrolling through his phone on the couch, I grabbed the earrings and sat down next to him. "Whose are these?" I asked, holding them up. His reaction was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The way his shoulders stiffened for a split second, the way his smile faltered. "Oh, those," he said too casually. "They must be yours. They're not mine." He shrugged, still not looking at me. "Then maybe they're Rachel's?" I blinked. "Rachel?" He nodded. "Yeah, from work. She came over the other day. Remember? She must have left them." My stomach twisted. Rachel from work. He'd mentioned her once or twice in passing, always casually, too casually. And now, suddenly, her earrings were in my bathroom? Something didn't add up. I stared at the earrings, the weight of them heavy in my palm. Why was Rachel here? I asked slowly. Matt glanced up from his phone, looking annoyed now. "We had a meeting. It wasn't a big deal. In our apartment?" I pressed. "You couldn't meet at the office?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Ash. It's just earrings. It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. It meant everything, because those earrings weren't just a mistake. They were evidence. Evidence of the late nights, the sudden work trips, the way he kept his phone hidden from me lately. I knew what they meant. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. The silence between us grew heavy, thick with things unsaid. "Are you sleeping with her?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Matt's face shifted, guilt flickering across his features, gone in an instant. He opened his mouth, ready to lie. I could see it coming, the same easy excuse I'd heard 1,000 times before. But then he hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Ash, he sighed, rubbing his eyes like he was the one who was tired. It didn't mean anything. I didn't plan for it to happen. There it was, the truth, sitting between us like a stone. I sat perfectly still, the earrings clutched in my hand. I thought I would cry, scream, throw things. But instead, I felt calm, numb, almost, like my heart had been bracing for this moment all along. How long? I asked. A few months, he admitted quietly. It was just a distraction. A distraction. That was what I had become, background noise to his real life. I stood up slowly, the earrings still in my hand. You could have just told me, you know. He looked up at me, startled. Told you what? That you didn't want this anymore. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Instead of sneaking around, instead of lying, you could have just told me. He didn't say anything, and in that silence, I realized there was nothing left to save. I walked into the bedroom and grabbed my things, throwing clothes into a bag without thinking. I didn't need to hear more. I didn't need an apology. The betrayal was already too heavy, and I wasn't going to carry it any longer. Matt followed me to the door, panic in his voice. Ash, wait, please. It didn't mean anything. We can fix this. I shook my head, my hand on the doorknob. I'm not a second choice, Matt. You made your decision. Now I'm making mine. He reached for me, but I pulled away. Don't, I whispered. Just don't. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and unforgiving. I stood outside for a moment, breathing it in, letting the weight of everything sink in. And then I started walking. In the weeks that followed, Matt tried to reach out. Texts, calls, even flowers left at my door. But I never answered. Some things can't be undone. Some betrayals leave cracks too deep to fill. One day, while unpacking in my new place, I found the earrings in the bottom of my bag. I held them in my hand, the tiny hoops catching the light. For a moment, I thought about keeping them. A reminder, maybe proof that I'd survived. But instead, I tossed them into the trash. Because I didn't need reminders. I didn't need closure. I just needed to move on. And every year, when spring hit, the entire student body went collectively insane. Something about the warmer weather made everyone restless. Classes became impossible to focus on, and teachers gave up on actual lessons, resorting to showing movies from the 90s that no one wanted to watch. That's when Jake, because it's always Jake, came up with what he called the ultimate cure for spring fever. He walked into lunch one day, dropped his tray dramatically on the table, and said, "We're going to build a pool." Dave looked at him like he'd just announced we were becoming astronauts. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jake leaned in, his voice low and serious. "A pool. On the roof." I should have said no. I should have told him it was the dumbest idea we'd ever had. But I didn't, because by now I knew better than to fight it. When Jake's brain grabbed hold of an idea, it was like trying to stop a freight train with a pool noodle. "How do we even get water up there?" Dave asked skeptically, poking at the mystery meat on his lunch tray. Jake grinned. "Simple. We steal it from the science lab." Jake's plan was so dumb, it was almost brilliant. The roof of our school had this flat, empty space behind the gym. No one ever went up there except maintenance guys, which meant it was perfectly out of sight. The idea? Drag a giant tarp onto the roof, line it with duct tape, fill it with water, and bam, instant pool. Where do we get a tarp that big? I asked, knowing full well this was a bad idea. Jake waved the question away. Brian's got one. His uncle uses it to cover a boat or something. And with that, the pool plan was officially in motion. 2 days later, we gathered behind the gym. Brian showed up with the world's sketchiest tarp, which looked like it had been sitting in a basement since the 1980s. It smelled vaguely like gasoline, but Jake shrugged. A little character never hurt anyone. The first challenge was getting the tarp onto the roof. Jake claimed it would be easy. It was not. We tried hoisting it up with a rope, but Brian accidentally let go of his end, and the tarp nearly crushed Dave under its weight. After 10 minutes of swearing and questionable teamwork, we finally managed to drag the thing onto the roof using a combination of brute force bad decisions, and sheer stupidity. Phase 1 complete, Jake said, wiping sweat off his forehead. Now comes the fun part. The next phase of Jake's plan involved sneaking into the science lab, grabbing the emergency fire hoses, and using them to siphon water up to the roof. In theory, it was brilliant if you ignore the fact that none of us knew how siphoning worked. We spent the better part of an hour dragging 2 giant hoses up the gym staircase, completely ignoring the fact that teachers were definitely going to notice 4 idiots hauling industrial equipment around the school. Brian, as always, offered his helpful commentary. "This is definitely illegal," he said casually, taking a sip of Mountain Dew as he wrestled with one of the hoses. Jake ignored him. "Illegal is just a state of mind, my friend. By some miracle, we got the hoses hooked up and started filling the tarp with water. For a brief, shining moment, it looked like everything might actually work. The tarp puffed up with water, shimmering in the afternoon sun like a majestic, makeshift pool. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Jake whispered, wiping away an imaginary tear. Kids who spotted us from the windows below started cheering. A small crowd gathered in the parking lot, pointing and laughing as the pool came to life. We felt like kings of the school, pioneers of reckless engineering. For about 5 minutes. That's when the duct tape started giving out. The weight of the water was way more than we'd planned for, and the tarp began sagging dangerously. Jake, standing triumphantly in the center of the pool, didn't seem to notice or care that the entire structure was on the verge of collapse. "Guys," Dave warned, inching backward, "I think this is..." Before he could finish, the tarp exploded. It happened in an instant. 1 second, Jake was standing knee-deep in water, basking in his own genius. The next second, the tarp gave way completely, and a tsunami of water came crashing off the roof like a scene from an apocalyptic movie. The water poured down the side of the building, flooding the gym doors and knocking over everything in its path, including 2 teachers who had wandered outside to investigate the commotion. Kids in the parking lot were screaming with laughter, scrambling to get out of the way as the wave of water surged across the pavement. Somewhere in the chaos, Brian shouted, "This is the best day of my life," before slipping and face-planting in a puddle. Meanwhile, Jake was still standing on the roof, arms spread wide like he was king of the world. "We did it," he shouted, even though everything had gone horribly wrong. Below us, Mr. Haggerty stormed into the parking lot, absolutely soaked and angrier than I'd ever seen him in my life. He looked like a man teetering on the edge of a mental breakdown. His shoes squelched with every step. "Who did this?" he bellowed. Jake leaned over the edge of the roof, grinning like an idiot. "It's called school spirit, Mr. Haggerty." That's when Mr. Haggerty lost it. He pulled out his walkie-talkie and shouted, "I want everyone on that roof in my office. Now!" The next few hours were a blur of detentions, furious lectures, and wet shoes. We were banned from the gym for the rest of the year, and Mr. Haggerty made us clean up the mess ourselves. Though Brian somehow slipped out halfway through, mumbling something about needing a snack break. Jake, he didn't care. As we mopped puddles off the floor, he turned to me, still grinning. "Totally worth it," he said, wringing out the mop with a dramatic flourish. And you know what? It kind of was. To this day, people still talk about the rooftop pool incident. The legend only grows with each retelling. Some say the wave was so massive it flooded the teacher's lounge. Others swear the gym floor was ruined for months. Jake, he always tells the story like we built the greatest pool in history, even though it lasted about 5 minutes. And every time he finishes the story, he leans back with that familiar grin and says, "We didn't just make a pool. We made memories." And honestly, he's not wrong. The apartment I moved into wasn't perfect. The rent was cheap, and it was close to work, but it had that old building feel. Faint smells you couldn't quite place, weird noises in the pipes, and a layout that didn't make much sense. The hallway was the worst part. It was too long, way longer than it should have been. I noticed it the first time I moved in, dragging boxes from the front door to my bedroom. The hallway stretched straight down, with walls painted a dull beige, illuminated by weak overhead lights. At the far end was the closet, or at least, that's what the landlord said. "Don't use it much," he muttered when I asked about it. "It's just an old closet. No point messing with it. That should have been a red flag, but I was too focused on getting my stuff moved into care. For the first few days, everything was fine. The place was quiet, and the hallway, though long, didn't bother me. It was just another part of the apartment. Until it wasn't. The first strange thing happened about a week after I moved in. I was lying on the couch, half watching TV, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, darting across the end of the hallway. It was quick, just a flicker, like someone had moved past the light and vanished into the closet at the far end. My heart skipped a beat. I sat up, squinting down the hall. Nothing was there, just the same beige walls, the same dim lights, and the closet door at the end. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light. Maybe. I went back to watching TV, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. But the next night, it happened again. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. The door cracked open just enough for me to see into the hallway. Out of nowhere, the same flicker of movement, a shadow, slipping past the edge of my vision. This time, it stopped at the end of the hall, just in front of the closet door. I froze, toothpaste foaming in my mouth, heart pounding in my chest. It stood there, perfectly still, just a shape at the far end of the hall. I couldn't see any details. It was just wrong. Too tall, too thin, and too still, like a mannequin that had been set up in the dark. I stared at it, hoping it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But then slowly it moved. The closet door opened, just a crack, and the shadow slipped inside. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I stood at the end of the hallway, staring at the closet. The door was shut, just as it had been when I moved in. I knew what I saw. I wasn't imagining things, but there were no footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Still, I kept the hallway lights on after that. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of something creaking. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening to the silence settle over the apartment. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. Old places make noise, after all. But then I heard it again, the soft creak of a door. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. I didn't want to go out into the hallway, but something deep inside me told me I had to. I couldn't ignore it. The hallway stretched out in front of me, long and dim, with the weak overhead lights buzzing quietly. I kept the flashlight aimed at the far end, my heart thudding in my chest. The closet door was open now, just a crack. I took a step forward, the wooden floor groaning under my weight. The hallway felt longer, like the more I walked, the further the closet got, stretching out beyond where it should have ended. The shadows between the lights seemed thicker, deeper, like something was hiding just out of sight. I told myself to turn back, go to bed, call the landlord in the morning. But something about the door, just barely ajar, made it impossible to leave. I had to see what was inside. I reached the end of the hallway, flashlight trembling in my hand. The closet door was old, the paint chipped, the handle cold under my fingers. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and pulled it open. The door swung inward, revealing nothing but darkness. I shined a flashlight inside, expecting to see shelves, boxes, maybe old junk left behind by the previous tenant. But the light didn't hit anything. It was just black, like the closet wasn't a closet at all. It was a void. I stood there, frozen, heart racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The air felt cold, too cold, and the longer I stood there, the more I felt it, something watching me from the darkness. Then, slowly, something moved inside the black. A hand, long, pale fingers curled around the edge of the door, followed by the faint outline of a face, just barely visible in the dark. Its eyes were huge, black pits that reflected nothing. And its smile stretched too wide. I staggered back, heart hammering in my chest. As the thing in the closet began to crawl forward, its limbs unfolding in slow, unnatural jerks. It moved like it wasn't used to having a body, dragging itself closer inch by inch. I turned and ran. The hallway felt endless. No matter how fast I ran, the door to my bedroom stayed impossibly far away. I could hear it behind me, dragging itself out of the closet, its breathing wet and raspy, like it was tasting the air. I hit the bedroom door and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with shaking hands. For a long time, I stood there pressed against the door, waiting for the thing to follow. But it never did. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know what was inside that closet, or why the hallway seemed to stretch longer every time I looked at it. I moved out a week later, told the landlord there was something wrong with the place, but I didn't tell him what I saw. I don't think he would have believed me anyway. Sometimes, though, I think about that hallway, about the way the shadows moved and the way the closet door opened on its own. I try to convince myself it was just a bad dream, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know the truth. And now, every time I open a door, any door, I can't help but hesitate, just for a second, afraid of what I might see on the other side. Because some doors, they were never meant to be open. It was supposed to be a quick, harmless lie. One of those things you say in passing just to fit in, thinking it won't matter. But it spiraled into something much bigger. And by the time I realized I was in too deep, literally, there was no turning back. It started last summer at a party by the lake. My friends were hyped about renting a boat and spending the day swimming and drinking in the sun. When someone asked if I knew how to swim, I didn't even hesitate. Yeah, of course, I said, waving it off like it was no big deal. I mean, how hard could it be? I'd been in pools before, paddled around, never really swimming, but always staying near the edge. I figured I could fake it well enough to get through one day without embarrassing myself. Big mistake. The day of the trip was perfect, bright blue skies, warm breeze, the kind of summer day that makes everything feel lighter. We loaded the boat with snacks, beer, and speakers blasting music, and I was feeling pretty good about my decision. I kept telling myself it wouldn't be a problem. I'd just stay close to the boat, maybe float around with a life vest on, and no one would notice I didn't know what the hell I was doing. For a while, things went exactly as planned. We anchored in the middle of the lake, and everyone jumped in, laughing and splashing. I slipped on a life jacket and eased into the water, doing my best to act casual. The water was cool and refreshing, and for the first few minutes, everything was fine. I floated on my back, sipped a beer, and thought, see, no problem. I got this. Then someone shouted, "Let's swim to the rock." I turned to see a massive boulder about 50 yards from the boat, sticking out of the water like a little island. "Come on," one of my friends yelled, already paddling toward it. First one that gets a free drink. Everyone dove in, laughing and racing toward the rock. And just like that, the pressure was on. I could already hear the teasing if I backed out. "What's the matter? Can't swim?" I could see their smug grins and hear the jokes they'd tell later. I didn't want to be the odd one out, the only person who stayed behind. So, against every ounce of common sense, I smiled and said, "Let's do it." I took off the life vest, tossed it into the boat, and jumped in. The first few strokes weren't terrible. I kept my head above water, doing some awkward version of a doggy paddle, trying to imitate what I'd seen other people do. But within seconds, I knew I was in trouble. The water was deeper than I'd expected, and my muscles started to burn almost immediately. I was kicking too hard, flailing my arms in weird, inefficient movements, and my heart was pounding from the effort. About halfway to the rock, panic set in. My legs felt like concrete. Every time I tried to tread water, I'd slip under, sputtering and gasping for air. I tried to keep going, but my strokes became more desperate, more erratic. Water splashed into my mouth, choking me. I looked around and realized how far I was from the boat, and how far I still was from the rock. I was stuck right in the middle with no strength left to get to either side. I panicked. In that moment, I realized I might actually drown. My chest tightened as I fought the urge to scream for help, too embarrassed to admit the truth. How do you explain to your friends that you lied about knowing how to swim while you're drowning in front of them? I kept kicking, kept struggling, but every time I sank beneath the surface, the fear grew. And then I went under. For a split second, everything was silent. The water closed over my head, cool and dark, and all I could think was, this is it. This is how it ends. I kicked as hard as I could, flailing toward the surface, but I was exhausted. My lungs screamed for air, and my arms felt heavy, useless. I tried to push up again, but I couldn't. Just as I thought I was done, a hand grabbed my arm. I burst to the surface, coughing and gasping, and there was Josh, one of my friends, holding on to me. "You okay?" he asked, pulling me toward him with one arm, calm but firm, like this was no big deal. I couldn't even respond. I just clung to him, too humiliated to say anything, as he towed me toward the rock. When we reached it, I collapsed onto the wet surface, gasping for breath, my heart still pounding in my chest. Josh sat next to me, watching me quietly for a moment before saying, "You don't know how to swim, do you?" I shook my head, too winded and embarrassed to lie. He didn't laugh. He didn't make a joke or call me an idiot. He just nodded like it all made sense now. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked, not unkindly. I shrugged, wiping water from my face. I didn't want to look stupid. He gave me a small, understanding smile. "Almost drowning is way stupider, man." We sat there in silence for a while, the sun warming the rock beneath us as the others splashed around in the distance, oblivious to what had just happened. After a few minutes, Josh patted my shoulder. "Next time, just wear the vest," he said gently. "No one cares." When we got back to the boat, no one asked why I'd bailed halfway to the rock. Josh didn't say anything, and neither did I. It was our little secret, a moment we silently agreed to leave behind. But that night, as I lay in bed replaying everything in my head, I felt something shift inside me. I realized how easily I could have died because I was too proud to admit the truth. I kept thinking about all the little lies we tell to save face, the tiny moments of dishonesty that seem harmless until they spiral out of control. I thought about how stupid it was to risk my life over something as simple as swimming, and how lucky I was that Josh had noticed before it was too late. The next day, I signed up for swimming lessons. It's been almost a year now, and I'm not gonna lie, I still suck at swimming. I'll probably never be great at it, and I'll definitely never join any races to rocks in the middle of a lake. But at least I know what to do now. At least I won't lie about it again. And next time, I'll wear the vest. Bye-bye. Until the next story.